Get comfortable. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw loosen. Let your hands go heavy wherever they happen to be resting right now. We are going to spend a long time together tonight, moving through something strange and slow and deeply familiar, and the only place you need to be is right here. Settled, quiet, ready to drift somewhere you have been before without quite realizing how far into it you were going? We are going to Springfield. Not the Springfield you already know from Sunday evenings and cable reruns and merchandise on shelves. The Springfield underneath that one. The version that the show has been quietly assembling for 36 years, layer by careful layer, one half-answered question at a time, one unexplained detail stacked patiently on top of another until the whole structure becomes visible to anyone willing to look at it from the right angle. The version that has been there all along, waiting with the patience of something that has been contaminating groundwater for decades, certain that eventually someone would stop and taste the difference. And the place we begin, the thing that unlocks more of this show than almost anything else, is not a character or a storyline or a single dramatic moment. It is a building, not a glamorous one, not the church or the school or the town hall. A squat and utilitarian structure sitting on the edge of town, its cooling towers leaking slow curls of steam into a yellowed sky, its reflection moving in the river that carries water past it and downstream into the town. A building so constant, so thoroughly part of the landscape, that the people of Springfield have long since stopped registering it as something to look at. They drive past it on the way to work without really seeing it. They watch its lights from their bedroom windows without thinking about what the lights mean. They have lived in its shadow so long that the shadow has simply become part of how the light looks. The Springfield nuclear power plant. It has been there since before the show had fully decided what it wanted to be. It appeared in the earliest episodes as background, establishing economic and geographic reality in the most efficient way possible. Homer works there. The town runs on its electricity. Burns owns it and everything the electricity touches. These were stated early and confirmed constantly, building into something so familiar that they became invisible. Background facts. The furniture of the show's world, too ordinary to examine closely. The theory asks you to do something different with those facts tonight. Stop treating the plant as background and move it into the foreground. Stop accepting Homer sleeping at his console as simple comedy and start asking what decades of that specific negligence, in that specific facility, in that specific town, would actually do to the people living downstream from it. Stop treating the building as backdrop and start treating it as cause. And when you do that, when you make that simple shift of attention, a picture comes into focus. Coherent, disturbing, supported at nearly every point by the show's own established facts. The Springfield nuclear power plant is mutating the entire town. Not as metaphor, not as satire, though it functions as that too. Within the internal logic of the show's own universe, the plant is the mechanism behind almost every strange and unexplained thing in Springfield. The yellow skin, the four fingers, the impossible physical resilience, the cognitive impairment that runs through the population like a thread, the collective amnesia that resets after every catastrophe, the agelessness. Every inexplicable, irreducible, persistently strange thing about this town traces back to those cooling towers and the invisible damage they have been releasing into the air and water of Springfield for as long as anyone in the show can remember. And no one in Springfield remembers any of this clearly, which is itself part of the pattern, and which we will come to understand as a consequence rather than a coincidence. Let us begin with what the show actually tells us, on the record, across its own episodes. The plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It provides the primary electrical power for the entire town. Sit with that for a moment. Not a secondary power source. Not one option among several. The primary source of electrical power for every home, every business, every hospital, every school in Springfield. Burns does not merely own a large employer. He owns the thing the town cannot function without. Remove his plant, and Springfield goes dark. The dependency is total, and Burns has understood and exploited this dependency for his entire tenure in ways the show documents repeatedly and the town absorbs without reaction. The town's relationship to the plant is not merely economic, it is existential. The town requires it the way a body requires a heart. The plant is also, by any reasonable measurement of industrial safety, one of the most catastrophically mismanaged facilities in the history of fictional infrastructure. A surprise safety inspection found 342 violations. 342. Not 2 or 3 or 12. 342 distinct, documented failures of safety protocol in a building where safety protocol exists specifically to prevent the surrounding population from being irradiated. The show delivers this number with the casual offhandedness of mentioning that the office coffee machine has been acting up again. Think about what 342 violations in a nuclear facility actually represents. Think about the duration of neglect required to produce that accumulation over time. Think about how thoroughly and deliberately the safety systems of this plant have been allowed to decay, violation by violation, across however many years of operation, uncorrected because correcting them would require acknowledging they existed. And acknowledging they existed would mean someone might start asking what those uncorrected violations had already done to the surrounding community during all the years they went unaddressed. The estimated cost to bring the facility into regulatory compliance, $56 million. Burns declined to spend it. Not because the money was unavailable. Burns is documented across many episodes as a billionaire of considerable and persistent magnitude, a man who possesses genuine geopolitical influence in addition to his financial resources. $56 million would be a rounding error in his fortune, well within the range he could authorize on a slow Tuesday afternoon without meaningful financial consequence. He declined because spending the money meant acknowledging the violations were real, and acknowledging the violations were real would trigger a cascade: regulatory inquiry, public scrutiny, legal exposure that Burns has been structuring his entire operation to prevent. Fix the plant and someone asks why it needed fixing. Someone asks what the unfixed plant has already done to the people who live downwind. Burns will not go anywhere near that question. He has organized his entire relationship with Springfield around ensuring that question is never seriously raised. The violations themselves deserve examination, because the show mentions each one in passing as though they are minor administrative matters, and they are anything but. Radioactive waste is being dumped directly into the town's waterways, not treated and transported to approved disposal facilities, dropped into the river that flows through Springfield, the river that children swim in during summer, the river that eventually connects to the town's drinking water supply. Radioactive material is being dumped onto children's playgrounds, the surfaces where Springfield's children play every afternoon, where they put their hands on the ground and then touch their mouths and their eyes. Plutonium is being used as a paperweight on someone's desk inside the facility, not stored in a radiation-shielded container behind sealed doors in a controlled environment, sitting in the open air of an office, serving as an object to hold papers down, radiating into the surrounding air as a working desk accessory. The cooling towers, which are critical structural components designed to manage the reactor's thermal output and which represent a primary safety boundary between the reactor's core operations and the surrounding environment, have developed cracks, and those cracks have been repaired with chewing gum. Used, previously chewed gum pressed into the fractures of a nuclear cooling tower, serving as the structural repair that stands between Springfield and whatever the reactor does when its cooling systems fail completely. The show tells you this and cuts to the next joke. Luminous rats inhabit the maintenance corridors and wall spaces of the facility, rats that emit visible light in complete darkness. The show depicts this as background texture, a detail that establishes the general condition of the plant's decay without drawing sustained attention to its implications. But luminous rats are not a plumbing problem or a pest control failure. They are evidence of a contaminated internal ecosystem. These animals have absorbed sufficient radioactive material from their environment to produce bioluminescence. They live inside the walls. They move through the maintenance spaces. They carry whatever they have absorbed into every part of the facility they can reach. And the facility they inhabit is the one producing the electricity that powers Springfield's homes. And then there is the detail the show introduces once and never revisits. Human skeletons in the basement. Not animal remains. Not ambiguous shapes. Human skeletons. In the basement of an active nuclear power plant. The inspectors see them. The camera sees them. The scene continues. No investigation is opened. No character stops the episode to demand an explanation for why human bones are located in the lower floors of a working reactor. The skeletons are acknowledged and the story moves on, because in Springfield the story always moves on, and the moving on is itself part of what the theory is trying to explain. Standing between this facility and the people of Springfield is the plant's safety inspector, the person whose entire professional function, whose sole reason for existing in this role is preventing a nuclear facility from poisoning the surrounding community. That person is Homer Simpson. The show's creator has stated on record that Homer has an IQ of 55. In most clinical classification systems, 55 falls well below the threshold for intellectual disability, which is generally set around 70. Homer is not merely below average. He is below the clinical floor that most systems use to identify disability requiring support. A season 12 episode reveals that Homer's already compromised cognitive state has been further impaired since childhood by a crayon physically lodged in his brain, a foreign object that has been reducing his cognitive capacity throughout his entire adult life. This object went undetected through decades of medical checkups in Springfield, which is either a stunning indictment of the town's medical infrastructure or evidence that someone knew about it and chose not to remove it. When the crayon is temporarily removed in that episode, Homer's intelligence increases dramatically. He becomes capable of sophisticated analysis and complex reasoning. He sees his job, his employer, and the architecture of his own life with a clarity he did not previously possess. He finds this clarity unbearable and has the crayon reinserted. He chose the fog. He chose not to understand. Homer has slept at his safety monitoring console. He has eaten donuts during active meltdown warnings. He once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to observe whether radiation would cause it to grow larger. He is not placed in this role as a caricature for isolated comic effect. He is a man with specific and documented cognitive limitations working in the specific role where those limitations produce the maximum possible harm to the surrounding community. And his employment in this role, as we will come to understand, is not accidental, not an oversight, and not a result of Burns's well-documented inability to identify competence in his employees. The first physical evidence that the plant's contamination has moved out through the facility walls and into the surrounding ecosystem appears in Season 2. Blinky, the three-eyed fish, caught in the river running alongside the power plant. The river that the show has already established receives the plant's radioactive effluent directly. A fish from this water has developed a third eye. The mutation is so dramatic and so visually unambiguous that it becomes national news within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as campaign material, as evidence that Burns's operation is poisoning the local environment. Burns is politically compelled to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate its alleged harmlessness. The town watches the performance and accepts it. The story moves on. Nobody tests the water after Blinky. Nobody commissions an independent study of the downstream fish population. Nobody asks the question that would be immediately obvious to any environmental scientist. If the fish living in this water have developed an additional sensory organ, what might be happening to the humans who have been drinking this water for years? What might be happening to the children who drink it every morning? To the people who have been drinking it for decades? The question has been sitting in the show since Season 2, unanswered, patient as contamination. Now look at the residents. Really look at them, without the normalizing lens of long familiarity. Homer's skull shape does not conform to human biological norms in any recognizable way. His jaw and forehead and cranial proportions deviate from human anatomy in consistent and specific ways that have been maintained across every artistic style the show has moved through over 36 years. He has a severe overbite. His eyes protrude. He has 4 fingers on each hand rather than 5. His body has a relationship with physical damage that does not map onto human physiology under any known conditions. Homer has been shot, electrocuted multiple times, struck by vehicles, fallen from significant heights, survived explosions and structural collapses and direct trauma to the head so severe that in any real-world equivalent, it would be fatal. He has walked away from every single incident. His healing rate is not merely the exaggerated resilience of cartoon physics. Within the show's own internal logic, Homer recovers from things that kill other characters. His body has adapted to damage in ways that suggest the adaptation is biological rather than narrative. Marge shares the bulging eyes and the 4 fingers. She maintains a tower of hair that has held its exact architectural form for 36 years without apparent structural product or deliberate daily maintenance. Hair does not do this. Regardless of texture, genetics, or styling routine, hair does not maintain a precise geometric configuration across 3 decades of sleep and weather and daily life. Marge's hair has been set into permanent calcified shape by some process the show does not name and that no resident of Springfield has ever questioned. Not because they trust the explanation, but because they have forgotten to notice it requires one. All three children display these characteristics. Bart's hair maintains its spiky configuration without product or effort across every circumstance the show places him in. Lisa's hair forms persistent geometric shapes that do not vary with weather or sleep or physical activity. Maggie's proportions deviate from infant norms in the same direction as her parents. And all three were born after both parents had spent years in Springfield's contaminated environment, absorbing whatever the plant releases through the air they breathed and the water they drank. They were conceived by two people whose biology had been processing Springfield's runoff for years, before any of the children existed. They gestated in a town where the river carries radioactive effluent. They have spent their entire lives eating food grown in this soil and drinking water from this source. Here is the crystallizing detail. When the show draws visitors from outside Springfield, people who arrive from elsewhere, celebrities and guest characters who enter the town from beyond its borders, they are drawn differently from the town's residents. More realistic proportions, more normally shaped features, eyes that sit in a face the way eyes are supposed to sit. A visual grammar measurably distinct from how Springfield people look. The production explanation is that it is a stylistic choice, and this is true as a production fact. But inside the show's internal logic, what does the visual difference actually mean? If Springfield is a real place, and these are real people, the observable difference between residents and visitors is documentation of a real biological difference. The people who live inside the contamination zone look different from the people who come in from outside it. The contamination has produced visible, consistent physical changes across the entire resident population, changes that are absent in people who have not spent their lives exposed to the same environment. The art style is not an explanation. Within the world of the show, it is evidence. The animals carry the evidence as persistently as the people. Santa's little helper has the same characteristic proportional deviations as his owners, the same slightly wrong eye placement, the same features that do not quite match the baseline of his species. Blinky has 3 eyes, the rats glow. Springfield's wildlife, at every level of the local ecosystem the show depicts, shows biological deviation from species baseline, in the direction you would predict given decades of radioactive contamination in the local water supply and soil. The show tells you this directly and unmistakably through Blinky. It shows you a 3-eyed fish, establishes that the fish lives in water contaminated by the plant, and then expects you to accept that the same contamination has had no observable effect on the humans living in the same environment. It shows you the mechanism and then asks you not to apply it to the most obvious population. Burns knows. He must know, because he is personally managing the medical consequences of radiation exposure in his own body. The Springfield Files reveals that Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment of such extreme intensity that it causes his body to emit visible green light. The treatment is what keeps him functional for exactly 7 more days. Without it, within approximately a week, his biological systems begin to fail in a cascade he cannot survive. The margin between life and death is precisely 1 treatment cycle. His continued existence is maintained with the precision of scheduled industrial equipment servicing. His body has long since lost the capacity to sustain itself through normal biological processes. It requires external radiation input on a strict schedule, the way that the town's homes require electrical input from the plant. Burns runs on nuclear power. His body requires it the way a living system requires the thing it cannot function without. And the same radiation, unmanaged and unregulated and continuous, operates on the people of Springfield through their water and their air, producing in the general population the biological consequences that Burns manages in himself through extraordinary medical infrastructure unavailable to anyone else in town. Burns understands radiation better than anyone in Springfield because radiation is the substance that keeps him alive. He knows with precision what sustained exposure does to biological systems, what it does to cognitive function, what it does to the capacity for complex reasoning and long-term planning. Because his own system is demonstrating these effects in real time, and he has spent his entire extended life managing them with the resources only he possesses. He allows the same process to operate on the people of Springfield, not through negligence, through design. A population whose cognitive function has been impaired by chronic neurological damage cannot organize effectively against the man responsible for the damage, cannot form sustained political resistance, cannot hold in mind, across sufficient time and with sufficient clarity, the chain of causation between the plant and their own condition. Burns's operation depends on the population remaining just impaired enough not to see it clearly, and Homer's continued employment is the mechanism that ensures the impairment continues. When German investors briefly purchased the plant, the first thing they did upon taking control was fire Homer. The second thing they did was assess the facility's violations and nearly went bankrupt from the remediation estimate. The violations were so extensive, the cost of addressing them so staggering, that ownership of the plant became untenable without Burns's particular approach to managing it. Burns bought it back and rehired Homer immediately. A competent safety inspector would shut the facility down within days of arrival. Homer's incompetence is not a management inconvenience. It is the operational requirement of the system Burns has built and maintained for decades. The crayon in Homer's brain is the show's most explicit metaphor for this arrangement. When the crayon is removed, Homer sees clearly. He understands his job and his employer and the structure of his own life for the first time. He is miserable. He has the crayon reinserted. He chooses the fog. But the episode raises a question it does not answer. How did a crayon lodge in a child's brain and go undetected through decades of medical care in Springfield? Either every doctor in town is comprehensively and uniformly incompetent, or someone knew the foreign object was there and chose not to mention it. If Burns's influence extends into the healthcare infrastructure of the town he essentially owns through the plant, the crayon is not an accident that happened to a child. It is a managed condition that serves an ongoing purpose. The radiation theory does not resolve one mystery about the Simpsons, it resolves all of them. The yellow skin, the four fingers, the impossible survivability, the collective amnesia, the agelessness that affects every resident of the town, the reset that follows every catastrophe. Every strange and persistent and unexplained feature of Springfield traces back to those cooling towers, releasing the same invisible contamination into the same water supply, doing the same things to the same population that has been unable, for 36 years, to ask why its fish have 3 eyes. The plant is not part of the show's setting. It is the engine that makes the show what it is. And the people of Springfield will never understand this, because the plant already made sure they cannot. Let us also consider the workers. The people who go into that building every day. Homer is the famous one, the safety inspector whose spectacular incompetence is part of the show's comedic architecture. But the plant employs a significant portion of Springfield's population. Lenny and Carl work there. Countless unnamed characters with yellow faces and 4 fingers and slightly wrong proportions. They spend their working hours inside a facility that we now know is leaking radiation at a scale that produced 342 regulatory violations. They eat their lunches there. They breathe the air that circulates through those compromised systems. They go home to their families and their children in the contaminated town, carrying whatever they absorb during the day. And they keep going back, not because they do not notice anything wrong, though perhaps some of them do not, but because the plant is the largest single employer in Springfield, because the economy of the town runs through it, because Burns has arranged things so thoroughly that the workers of Springfield do not have a viable alternative to accepting the conditions the plant imposes. The plant poisons them and employs them simultaneously, and the employment is just visible enough to obscure the poisoning. This is the most elegant part of Burns's arrangement. He does not merely own the town's power supply. He owns the town's livelihood. To challenge the plant is to threaten your own job, your neighbor's job, the economic foundation on which every Springfield business depends. The contamination and the employment come from the same source and cannot be separated, and Burns has understood this for decades. There is also the question of what Springfield's children are experiencing. The children grow up in this environment. They breathe this air from their first breath. They drink this water from the beginning of their lives. They play on the playgrounds where radioactive waste has been dumped. They swim in the river where the plant's effluent flows. The theory predicts, and the show's visual grammar confirms, that their developing biology is adapting to this environment from the very beginning of their development. Their bodies are not being exposed to contamination as an adult system that was healthy before. They are developing inside the contamination, and what they develop into is shaped by what surrounds them as they grow. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie are not merely residents of a contaminated town. They are people whose entire biological development occurred inside a contamination zone. Whatever the radiation has done to the adults of Springfield, it has done to them continuously since before birth. And the show depicts all three children with the same characteristic visual deviations from human norms that mark every other Springfield resident. The same proportions, the same skin color, the same four fingers. The contamination is not an accident that happened to them. It is the environment in which they were formed. The show has also given us, in scattered episodes across its history, glimpses of what Springfield was before the plant became what it is now. The town had an economy before Burns's power monopoly. It had institutions and community life that did not depend entirely on his facility. The Springfield of the early 20th century, glimpsed in flashback episodes and referenced in historical asides, was a different kind of town. Not dramatically different in the way that matters, but without the specific concentration of dependency and contamination that the plant introduced. The plant did not simply appear in a town that was already what it is. The plant produced the town that Springfield has become, and Burns has been managing that production, deliberately and with full understanding of its consequences, for his entire tenure as the plant's owner. The final observation about the radiation theory is the most quietly devastating of all. The show has been running for 36 years. The contamination, if it is real within the show's logic, has been operating for at least that long, plus however many years preceded the show's beginning. 2 generations of Springfield residents have grown up inside it. A third generation is growing up inside it now, because none of the children in the show age and none of the contamination has been addressed. The exposure is continuous and cumulative. And every week the show returns to Springfield and everything is exactly as it was, and nobody has done anything about it, and nobody will, because the plant already made sure they cannot. If you are still awake, drop a comment with where you are right now and what time it is there. I love knowing what corners of the world this reaches in the small hours. And if you want more long nights like this one, subscribe. We are just getting started. Number. Section 2. Homer's coma. There is a theory about The Simpsons that does not make the show worse when you encounter it. It does something quieter than that and more lasting. It reframes the entire project. It takes 36 seasons of Homer Simpson stumbling through impossible situation after impossible situation and always, without exception, finding his way back to the same house and the same couch and the same family, and it reveals what that pattern might actually be about. Not a sitcom, a love letter, written in the grammar of dreams, written by a man who cannot wake up. On the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of the 4th season aired. The episode was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was a comedy escalation. Bart has been pulling April Fool's pranks on Homer all day, each one larger and more elaborate than the last. The climax of this escalation involves one of Homer's beer cans and an industrial paint shaker at an auto body shop. Bart agitates the can thoroughly, returns it to the refrigerator, and waits. Homer opens it. The explosion sends Homer to the hospital. This is the setup. What happens next is the hinge point that the entire theory turns on. Homer is in his hospital bed, recovering from the explosion, when he notices a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He crosses to the machine. It fails to dispense. He pushes on it. The machine tips. It falls on Homer, and Homer Simpson flatlines. The show does not treat this as a cutaway or a dream segment or a treehouse of horror aside. Homer is clinically unconscious. His family gathers. Bart comes to his bedside and, in a moment that the show handles with genuine emotional care, confesses that everything was his fault. The grief is not played for laughs. It sits in the scene with real weight. And then Homer springs awake. He grabs Bart and the family laughs and the episode moves toward its conclusion. The show tells you he woke up. And then, almost incidentally, in the final moments before the credits, the episode delivers one more piece of information. During the coma, Homer permanently lost 5% of his brain function. Destroyed. Irreversible. Gone. His response to this information is to laugh. He says he does not know why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The Homer coma theory begins here. Homer did not wake up. The moment where he springs back to consciousness is not the conclusion of the medical crisis. It is the opening of the dream. Homer's brain was permanently damaged during that coma, and what the show presents as recovery is actually the beginning of a long, elaborate, increasingly impossible simulation. Every episode since April 1993, every single one, is Homer's unconscious mind generating a version of his life to hold on to while his body lies in a bed in Springfield General. The first category of supporting evidence is the tonal shift, and it is the most immediately visible piece of evidence once you know to look for it. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a specific kind of show. Not realistic in every detail, but genuinely grounded in the emotional reality of domestic life. The stories engaged with recognizable problems and took those problems seriously. Homer tries to quit drinking, and the episode treats the difficulty of addiction honestly without easy resolution. Marge comes dangerously close to an affair, and the story engages with the genuine complexity of long-term marriage without pretending the complexity is simple. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher, and the grief of losing him is rendered with emotional specificity that does not condescend to children's inner lives. Bart faces being held back in school and must sit with consequences that feel genuinely consequential. These are the themes of a show invested in its characters' inner lives. The comedy emerges from the situations, but the situations carry real emotional weight. The show was grounded in the way that good domestic comedies are grounded, in recognizable human experience, rendered through a particular and heightened lens. After the coma episode, the shift is not gradual, it is seismic and immediate. Homer goes to space, Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster, Homer discovers his mother is alive and has been a fugitive radical since 1969. Homer joins a secret society that has been operating in Springfield for generations. Homer meets God on 2 separate occasions. Homer travels to dozens of countries, holds hundreds of different jobs, befriends an implausible number of celebrities, and survives physical punishment at a scale that would eliminate any real human being many times over. The show goes from a family sitcom invested in domestic emotional reality to a vehicle for increasingly elaborate and increasingly surreal scenarios. And it does this starting directly in the season after the coma episode. The escalation is not subtle. It is a sharp and immediate departure from what the show was doing before. Critics and fans have been debating when The Simpsons changed for more than 20 years. The internet has generated countless theories about the quality shift and what caused it. The coma theory offers an answer that does not require any judgment about quality at all. The show did not get worse after season 4. Homer's brain got worse. What reads as a decline in internal coherence is the faithful documentation of a dreaming consciousness becoming progressively less able to maintain coherent structure. The plots grow more impossible because a deteriorating brain cannot sustain the kind of grounded internal logic that characterized the earlier seasons. The dream becomes more surreal because that is what dreams do, as the mind generating them loses its grip on the rules of waking reality. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere called Homer the Heretic, Homer has a direct conversation with God. God tells Homer that he will eventually learn the meaning of life, but not yet. His time is coming, God says. 6 months later, the vending machine falls. Under the coma theory, this line is a prophecy, not a theological gag in a comedy episode, an announcement. God was telling Homer that his conscious life was nearly over, that in 6 months, the Homer who drives the car and eats the donuts and loves his family in the real world would slip away, and what remained would be the dream. The long, strange, increasingly impossible dream about the family he was not ready to leave. The aging problem is the piece of evidence the coma theory handles with the most elegant simplicity of any available explanation. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. This is a fact so thoroughly normalized by familiarity that most viewers have entirely stopped noticing it as strange. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Homer and Marge have not accumulated a wrinkle or a gray hair across 3.5 decades. The show uses a floating timeline, and every theory about The Simpsons must engage with this phenomenon. The radiation theory proposes that nuclear contamination has altered the cellular biology of the town's residents at such a fundamental level that normal aging processes have been disrupted. The cartoon logic explanation notes that animated shows simply operate this way and have always operated this way, and this is not remarkable. Both are real explanations at the level they address. The coma theory's answer is simpler and more emotionally devastating than either. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went to sleep in April 1993. Homer's brain cannot age his children because it has no information about who they become after that date. He fell asleep when Bart was 10 and Lisa was 8, and those are the reference images his brain has available to it. Those are the versions of his children his sleeping mind returns to when it needs to render them. He has no memories of an older Bart or a grown Lisa because those versions of his children did not yet exist when the machine fell. His wife does not age because the last image his conscious mind received of Marge is the image his dreaming brain works from, and that image does not update because the person who would update it has not been conscious to receive new information. His world is preserved at the moment he lost it, not because time froze in Springfield, because Homer's capacity to perceive and record time froze with him. The dream renders his family with the faithful, aching fidelity of a memory that cannot update itself, because the person doing the remembering has not been awake to see what happened next. The celebrity appearances in later seasons resolve cleanly under this theory in a way they do not resolve under any other reading. Homer's unconscious mind, lying in a hospital bed with whatever neural activity remains to it, receives ambient signals from the world outside. The television in the room, conversations in the hallway, the radio playing somewhere on the ward, music and voices and names that drift through the fog of unconsciousness into whatever is still processing. His brain does with these signals what a sleeping mind does with any input. It incorporates them into the dream. Names become characters. Voices become visitors to Springfield. Every celebrity who appears in the show after April 1993 is a signal Homer's brain intercepted through unconsciousness and translated into a dream character, because the dream needs to be populated, and his sleeping mind uses whatever material it can reach through the fog. The show itself touched the theory in season 34 in a way that is strange regardless of how you read it. An episode included what was described as a deliberately leaked fake deleted scene showing Homer waking from a long coma and revealing that every outlandish adventure had been a dream. The writers produced this scene. They animated it and voiced it and showed it to the audience. And then they said it was a hoax. A fake, not real. The denial of the coma theory arrived packaged inside an episode that explicitly depicted the coma theory being true. They showed you the answer and called the showing a prank. The audience laughed. In the same way Homer laughed when he was told he had lost 5% of his brain function, without fully knowing why the laughter was the appropriate response. Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015 and dismissed it as fan speculation, but his dismissal left things unaddressed. He did not explain the aging freeze. He did not explain the tonal shift after season 4. He did not explain God's 6-month warning. He did not explain why the show has grown progressively more surreal and less constrained by its own internal logic with each passing season, which is exactly what you would expect from a dream generated by a brain in slow deterioration. He said it was not true and the conversation moved on. The theory did not move on, because it does something that no official explanation achieves. It makes the show make sense. All of it. Every frozen age, every celebrity absorbed from the hospital room noise, every impossible adventure, every reset that erases consequences between episodes as though they never occurred, every time Homer survives something that should have ended him, none of it requires explanation if Homer is dreaming. His body is in a bed, only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one telling the story. The story requires that Homer survive, so Homer survives. The story requires that the family come home, so the family comes home. The story requires that nothing permanently change, so nothing permanently changes. Here is the emotional center of the theory, the part that does not leave you after you have moved on from reading about it. If Homer is dreaming, what is the dream for? What does it exist to hold on to? Not space or secret societies or any of the elaborate scenarios the later seasons have constructed. Those are the noise of a brain filling in the scenery, using whatever ambient material it can reach. The dream itself, beneath all the noise, is about something far simpler and far more heartbreaking in its simplicity. He wants his family. He wants Marge to still love him the way she did on the last morning that was real. He wants Bart to still be his boy, aggravating and loud and deeply, stubbornly, completely loved. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her room, still fighting for things that matter even when the fighting costs her everything. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold in the crook of one arm. He wants the house on Evergreen Terrace. He wants Friday night. He wants all of it to be okay in the most specific and personal and irreducible way that phrase can mean. And in the coma, it is. Every week, the catastrophe happens and is resolved. The family comes through it. The credits roll. And next week they are all there again, exactly as he needs them to be. Nobody has aged, nobody has left. The loop runs because Homer's unconscious mind will not allow the story to end. Because ending the story means waking up. It means finding out how many years have passed in the world where his body is lying still. How old his children are now, in the real world. Whether Marge is still in the chair beside his bed, still waiting. Or whether enough time has passed that the waiting ended somewhere along the way. Or it means not waking up at all, which is the outcome the dream exists to indefinitely defer. Every episode since April 1993 is the same thing in a different costume. A man refusing to let go of his family by dreaming them into permanent safety. The children never old enough to leave. The wife never tired enough to stop loving him. The house always exactly as he left it. The story always recoverable. The family always whole. The show will never confirm this, but it will not disprove it either. The evidence is not in any single episode. It is in the accumulation, in the structure, in the simple, heartbreaking 36-year-old fact that Homer Simpson always finds his way home, because home is the only thing worth dreaming about, and the dream is not a nightmare. It is the only heaven a man like Homer would ever want. There is another dimension to the coma theory that most discussions of it skip past because it is the most uncomfortable part. If Homer is dreaming, he is not doing it alone. His family is in the dream with him. Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, the people he loves most in the world are fictional versions of themselves, rendered by his unconscious brain with whatever fidelity it can manage. The real Marge is somewhere. The real Bart is somewhere. The real Lisa is somewhere. And they are aging. They are living through the years that Homer is missing. They are becoming people that Homer's dreaming mind cannot know, because his dreaming mind only has access to who they were. The real Bart, if Homer has been in a coma since 1993, would be in his early 40s by now. The real Lisa would be approaching 40. Maggie, who was a baby in April 1993, would be in her 30s. These people exist in the real world of the show's universe, aging normally, living through what 30-plus years actually does to a person. And Homer's brain is projecting dream versions of them that are frozen at the ages he remembers, which are the ages they were when the machine fell. If Homer ever woke up, he would not recognize the people waiting for him. The Bart who would be at his bedside would be a middle-aged man. The Lisa who had been advocating for his recovery would be an adult woman with 3 decades of experience Homer knows nothing about. The gap between the dream versions and the real versions would be enormous, built from all the years Homer was not there to live them. This is why the theory, at its emotional core, is a love story rather than a horror story. Homer does not dream the impossible adventures for the sake of the adventures. He dreams the family. Constantly, persistently, in every episode and every season and every bizarre scenario the show constructs. The real content of the dream is always the same. Marge loves him, the kids are okay, the house is there, the family is intact, the adventures are window dressing, the family is the point. And Homer's brain, generating this dream from whatever neural activity remains to it, is doing something remarkable. It is maintaining, across 32 years of unconsciousness, a simulation so detailed and so emotionally textured that it can produce what feel like genuine moments of connection and love and family life. Homer in the dream feels what he would feel if he were actually there. He laughs, he worries, he loves Marge in the specific way that is his. He fails his children and makes it right, and fails them again and makes it right again. The emotional content of the dream is real even if the circumstances producing it are not. The dream is a kind of devotion, the most sustained act of love the show depicts, and it is one that occurs entirely in the dark, inside the mind of a man that nobody on the outside knows is capable of it. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? In the summer of 1995, The Simpsons accomplished something that no American animated series had ever attempted. It built a genuine mystery, a real whodunit with a victim and a town full of suspects and a national contest inviting millions of viewers to solve it before the answer aired. And the resolution it delivered when that summer ended, while officially on record as closed, has never stopped generating questions from anyone who examines it with any sustained care. Let us go back to the beginning of the crime. By the end of the 6th season's final episode, Burns had accomplished something remarkable in its comprehensiveness. He had personally wronged every significant character in Springfield's universe within the span of a single extended campaign of destruction. He had discovered oil beneath Springfield Elementary and extracted it. draining the school's operational budget. He had driven Moe's Tavern into bankruptcy through his economic manipulation of the local market. His construction caused a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield retirement castle and displaced every resident, including Grandpa Simpson. He injured Santa's little helper during the machinery installation. And for his capstone achievement, he built and activated a device that physically blocked the sun over all of Springfield, eliminating natural light from the entire town so that every resident would have no viable choice but to purchase electricity from his plant, which now served as the town's only functional light source. When Smithers, his longtime personal assistant, expressed moral objection to this plan, Burns fired him on the spot. Every character in the show had a specific, documented, personal grievance against Burns at the moment he was shot. Homer, because Burns could not recall his name after years of direct employment and daily interaction. Bart and Lisa, because their school was emptied of the resources that made education possible. Grandpa, because his retirement community was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because his livelihood was eliminated. Tito Puente, because the music program was defunded. Moe, because everything he had built was gone. Smithers, because the man he had devoted his life to had discarded him the moment he raised a moral objection. A town meeting was called. Characters arrived visibly armed. Burns was confronted by his assembled community, and then a single shot was fired. Burns staggered to the town sundial and collapsed, his hands falling on two letters of its face, W and S. From Burns's own perspective, looking upward from where he had fallen, M and S. America waited through the summer. The investigation in Part 2 featured Chief Wiggum and the Springfield Police Department at their most comprehensively incompetent, which is saying something given their consistent baseline. Smithers immediately and dramatically confessed to the shooting. His confession immediately fell apart when it emerged that he had been in a state of complete alcoholic blackout at the time of the shooting and had in fact shot an entirely different person, Old Jasper, in the wooden leg, in a completely different location from where Burns was found. Wrong victim, wrong weapon effect, wrong everything. The confession was not merely wrong but impressively, elaborately wrong in every particular. Suspects were eliminated methodically. A piece of physical evidence emerged, an eyelash on Burns's suit, submitted to DNA analysis, identified as belonging to a member of the Simpson family. Fingerprints on the weapon also pointed toward Homer. With his documented motivation of years of humiliation over Burns's inability to remember his name pushing him past multiple breaking points, Homer was arrested and approaching conviction when Burns woke from his coma. Burns identified Maggie. His account: he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the meeting, attempted to take her lollipop. His gun fell from its holster during the struggle. Maggie picked it up, and the gun discharged. Chief Wiggum observed that no jury in the world would convict a baby. The case was closed. Except it was never really closed. The closure was administrative. The logic was something else entirely. Start with the contest. Fox invited viewers to submit their guesses for the shooter, with the prize of being animated into a future episode. The DVD commentary for these two episodes contains a remarkable admission from the show's creative team. When submitted entries were reviewed after the answer was revealed, not a single entry in the randomly selected sample had correctly identified Maggie as the shooter. The winner was chosen at random from the pool and received a cash payment instead of the animated appearance because they had not guessed correctly. The mystery was presented as solvable from the clues embedded in Part 1. When the answer arrived, essentially nobody in the sample had solved it from those clues. Either the clues were insufficient to point clearly toward the answer, or the answer did not follow as logically from the established evidence as the show wanted you to believe. The writers acknowledged knowing of exactly one person who had posted the correct answer online on the night of the original broadcast. That person was using a college internet account that had expired by the time the contest ended, and the producers tried to contact them. They literally could not locate the one person who got it right. Now examine the physical evidence the show uses to justify its resolution. The sundial. Burns falls and his hands land on letters spelling, depending on orientation, either W and S or M and S. The show uses this as the central visual clue. Maggie Simpson, M and S. Burns himself, on record within the episode, stated that his hands were not intentionally positioned on those letters. He fell. He did not arrange himself to leave a message. The primary visual evidence of the resolution was described by its supposed source as a coincidence. The most prominent clue in the most promoted mystery in the show's history was admitted by the victim to be meaningless. The gun. Before the shooting, Burns's holster was shown to be empty. The gun was already missing from his person before any encounter with Maggie in the parking lot. Whoever shot Burns used Burns's own gun, obtained through some interaction that transferred it. The shooter did not come armed intending to shoot Burns. They found the gun through circumstance. An infant discovering a gun on the ground fits this profile. So does a substantial number of other characters who were present that evening without their own weapons. Burns's last words before being shot, "Oh, it's you!" Not surprise, calm recognition, the flat, slightly familiar acknowledgement of someone encountered before, someone whose presence is unexpected but not alarming. The phrase you use when you look up and see a face you know. Has Burns established a meaningful prior relationship with Maggie Simpson? Does the show document any dynamic between them that would make his seeing an infant in a parking lot and responding with the quiet recognition of "it's you" feel natural or consistent? It does not. Burns struggles to remember Homer, who has worked directly for him for years, who interacts with him regularly and directly. The suggestion that Burns would recognize a baby he has not meaningfully interacted with and greet her with calm familiarity does not map onto any established characterization. "Oh, it's you" implies prior acquaintance of some weight. The list of characters Burns knows well enough that their presence produces this quiet register rather than surprise is not long. In Season 18, Homer states in casual conversation that he was the one who shot Burns. He simply says it. On camera, in an episode, nobody investigates, nobody reopens the case. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the most powerful man in Springfield, and the show treats the line as a throwaway that leads nowhere. Either Homer is lying for the specific kind of attention that confessing to famous crimes provides, which is completely within his established character, or Homer is telling the truth. And if Homer is telling the truth, the baby was blamed for something her father did, the DNA evidence was misinterpreted or the chain of custody was compromised, and the case that was closed was never actually solved. The Marge theory has been constructed with serious attention to what the evidence actually supports. Marge has the most comprehensive motivation of any character. She watched Burns dismantle her children's school, injure her dog, steal the sun from her town. Marge beneath the patient surface is not passive. She is the load-bearing wall of the family, and when the structural foundation is directly threatened, she acts. A prior episode in which Burns developed genuine romantic feelings for Marge is relevant. If Burns looked up from the parking lot floor and recognized Marge, if "oh, it's you" carried the specific quality of seeing someone you once cared about, he might have made a different choice. He woke from his coma and, rather than name the woman he had feelings for, let the investigation find its own answer in the parking lot evidence. The baby who cannot be prosecuted. The perfect resolution for a case that needed to be closed without anyone being held accountable. Fully animated alternate endings exist. A complete Smithers resolution was produced, voiced, and edited as a functional episode conclusion. It was subsequently shown in a clip show and dismissed on the grounds that ignoring the Simpson DNA evidence would be absurd, a dismissal that was phrased as a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, in which a jury ignored DNA evidence and returned an acquittal. The show was telling you, through a fictional dismissal of a fictional alternate ending, that official answers and true answers are not required to be the same thing. The writers considered Barney Gumble as the shooter in early drafts. The answer was not predetermined by the clues in Part 1. The clues were adjusted retroactively to fit whichever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was reverse engineered, and once you know that, the confidence of the official resolution becomes much harder to sustain. The final shot. After Burns has identified Maggie and the case is closed and the family departs the hospital room, the camera stays with Maggie. She is alone. She looks around the room, a methodical scan of each corner and doorway, checking for observers. Once she has confirmed privacy, she moves her pacifier in a gesture that precisely mimics pulling a trigger. The show frames this as confession. She did it, and here is the private gesture that proves she knows. But the behavioral sequence requires theory of mind, the understanding that other people have perspectives and awareness different from your own, and that their presence or absence matters strategically. It requires the decision that certain behaviors are for private performance only. These are not capacities associated with typical infancy. Maggie is not confessing. She is remembering. She was in that parking lot. She witnessed something. And what the gesture reenacts may be what she saw, not what she did. The case was closed. The truth is somewhere else. There is one more dimension to the Burns shooting that the official resolution leaves completely unaddressed, and it is the one that the town's response makes most troubling. Burns was shot in public, in a town where every resident had a documented grievance against him, at the end of a campaign of destruction that included stealing the sun. And the official conclusion is that the shooting was accidental, the result of a brief encounter in a parking lot between a billionaire and an infant. Springfield accepted this. The town that formed a mob and burned down its own town hall over a misunderstanding about a bear. The town that rioted over the cancellation of a television program. The town that regularly responds to minor irritations with community-wide violence and sustained group action. This town looked at the conclusion that a baby accidentally shot its most powerful and most hated resident, said that tracks, and went home. Nobody in Springfield organized around the Burns shooting. Nobody used it as the catalyst it should have been, a moment of accountability for a man who had just stolen the literal sun. The shooting happened, Burns was identified, and Springfield moved on. The grievances were not addressed. The school funding was not restored. The sun device was disabled in the movie years later, as a separate event. The shooting resolved nothing for the people who were harmed, because the shooting was not meant to resolve anything. Whatever actually happened in that parking lot, the result was the preservation of the status quo. Burns survived. The plant continued operating. The town continued depending on it. The workers continued going back to their jobs. And the case was closed with a resolution that nobody could act on because the identified shooter was a baby who could not be prosecuted. The most convenient possible outcome for everyone who wanted the investigation to end without consequences. And in Springfield, convenience for the powerful is not coincidence. It is the product of the infrastructure Burns has spent a century building. Number. Section 4. The immortality of Charles Montgomery Burns. How is Mr. Burns still alive? Not in the sense of his surviving the individual incidents that periodically threatened to end him, though those survivals are worth examining in their own right. In the more fundamental, more biologically uncomfortable sense. This man was born in the 19th century. He describes personal memories of events from before the turn of the 20th century as though he was there, because he was. He is currently running a multi-billion-dollar corporation and manipulating a town's municipal politics with a strategic intelligence that most of his opponents cannot match. His mind is fully operational. His grasp of long-term planning, finance, and manipulation is undiminished. He has been operating at this level for longer than any human being should be capable of sustained function. The show has never committed to a specific birth year for Burns, because doing so would force a direct confrontation with the arithmetic. His references to personal historical experience and his documented associations with historical figures place his birth date somewhere in the late 1800s at the most conservative reading. He served in World War II as a functional adult, which anchors him no later than the early 1920s as a birth year. He has described the Gilded Age not as historical knowledge but as personal memory. By any honest accounting of what the show has established, Burns is at minimum 100 years old, possibly considerably more. And he does not merely persist in a diminished state as a relic. His physical body is frail to the point of structural absurdity, a form so comprehensively deteriorated that a stiff wind constitutes a genuine danger. But his cognitive function is entirely intact and operational. Burns is arguably the most strategically capable character in Springfield's universe, operating with a long-view ruthlessness and a patience across decades that no other character the show has introduced can approach. He plans across timeframes longer than most people's lives. He maintains grudges for generations. He constructs schemes requiring sustained, sophisticated reasoning over extended periods. His mind has been doing this for over a century without meaningful degradation. The mechanism of his survival is addressed most directly in the Springfield Files. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment of such extreme intensity that it causes his body to emit visible green light after each session. The treatment maintains him for exactly 7 more days. Without it, within approximately 1 week, his systems fail in a cascade he cannot survive. The margin between life and death is precisely 1 treatment cycle. His continued existence is maintained with the regularity of industrial equipment maintenance, not medicine in any conventional sense, not the management of a condition toward eventual recovery. the continuous, scheduled servicing of a biological system that has long since lost the capacity to sustain itself through normal processes. And the treatment involves radiation, because of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, who has profited from nuclear energy for over a century, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to remain biologically functional. Burns does not merely profit from radiation, he runs on it. His body requires external radiation input on a strict schedule, the way that Springfield's homes require electrical input from his plant. He is as dependent on controlled nuclear energy as the town he has been contaminating with uncontrolled nuclear energy for decades. The disease equilibrium scene is one of the most quoted moments in the show's entire run, and it reads very differently once you understand the radiation maintenance framework. Burns visits a doctor who informs him, after careful examination, that he has every disease known to medical science, all of them, simultaneously, present in his body at the same time. These diseases exist in a state of perfect equilibrium, each one being held in check by the presence of every other, none of them able to advance to a fatal stage, because all the others are blocking the path forward. The doctor compares it to 3 people trying to pass through a single doorway simultaneously. None of them can get through. The diseases are all trying to kill Burns at once, and consequently none of them can. Burns is the sickest man in the country, and functionally impossible to kill through illness as a direct consequence of being the sickest man in the country. This is played as comedy. It is also, within the radiation framework, a precise and somewhat terrifying description of what the weekly treatments are actually maintaining. Burns's body is not producing this disease equilibrium through any natural biological process. No natural human immune system generates this outcome. The weekly radiation treatments are the regulatory mechanism. The radiation is holding every illness in precise stasis, balanced against every other illness, preventing any single condition from gaining the advantage it needs to advance toward a terminal stage. It is not healing Burns, it is managing him, keeping every illness equally suppressed, none of them able to dominate. Burns's body is a reactor. The weekly treatment is the adjustment of the control rods. Calibrate them precisely and the system holds for another 7 days. Allow the calibration to slip and everything surges simultaneously toward catastrophic failure. Smithers is the technician who runs the maintenance schedule. He manages Burns's medical appointments with the vigilance of someone who understands precisely what the appointments are preventing. He monitors Burns's physical condition with an attention that borders on round-the-clock obsession. He has structured his entire professional and personal existence around ensuring that Burns makes every weekly appointment without exception or delay. The show has established across many episodes that without Smithers managing every aspect of Burns's daily existence, Burns would not survive. Not would struggle or would be diminished. Would not survive. Smithers keeps Burns alive through logistical competence and sustained attention, and he knows this with complete clarity, and this knowledge is one of the actual structural foundations of their relationship alongside everything else that exists between them. Smithers's devotion is not purely emotional. It is medical necessity wearing the clothes of loyalty. The historical dimension adds layers the show visits across scattered episodes without ever fully assembling into a direct statement. Burns knew Howard Hughes. He attended elite universities in eras that no living person can personally remember. He participated in morally compromised ways in World War II, including the acquisition and long-term concealment of a $1 trillion bill belonging to the United States government. He has described the Gilded Age as lived experience. He has referenced personal associations with people who have been historical figures for decades. The Burns family dynasty extends behind the current Burns in ways that make the current Burns' longevity feel less like an exception and more like a continuation of a pattern. The dynasty is documented as one of the oldest continuous concentrations of wealth in the show's American universe. The kind of wealth that builds the infrastructure others depend on and then charges everyone else to use what they cannot do without. The kind that has existed so far above accountability for so long that accountability has become, for this family, theoretical rather than practical. Normal generational succession disrupts concentrated power. Children inherit and redirect and disperse. The Burns dynasty has not experienced this disruption across its documented history. Either the family has been extraordinarily lucky across multiple generations, or there has been something structural about the Burns approach to tenure that extends it beyond what natural biology normally permits. Burns has survived being shot by Maggie Simpson. He has survived dozens of hospitalizations for crises that would not have left other characters functional. He comes back not through passive resilience or cartoon logic, but through infrastructure. Through the machinery of wealth that ensures no matter what happens to his physical form, there is someone present with the resources and the expertise to restore the maintenance schedule and continue the management. Homer's immortality within the show's fiction is passive. It is a function of narrative necessity. Burns's immortality is engineered. Every dollar he has spent, every institution he has compromised, every physician he has retained, every research program he has funded, all of it in service of one purpose: keep Burns alive, keep the schedule running, keep the reactor functioning. Because if Burns dies, the system he has built around his own survival does not automatically continue. The power plant's future becomes uncertain. His political influence over Springfield's institutions dissolves. The arrangements that organize the town's economy around his interests begin to unravel, and as they unravel, questions that the arrangements exist to suppress begin to surface. Springfield cannot afford to let Burns die. The town's economic foundation is organized around his plant. Remove Burns, and someone accountable might arrive who would assess the facility, encounter the 342 violations, and begin asking the questions the violations imply about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers, and the billionaire who has been alive long enough to remember the Spanish-American War as a current event. Burns is too embedded in Springfield to be permitted to fail. He is simultaneously the cause of the town's contamination and the foundation of its economy. He cannot die because dying would require the town to confront what his continued operation has cost everyone inside it. And so the treatments continue. The schedule holds. Smithers manages the appointments, and the oldest man in Springfield, possibly the oldest man in America, continues operating from his office in the plant that powers the town he has been slowly poisoning for over a century. He is not immortal. He is something harder to classify. He is too expensive to permit to die, and Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as the lights stay on. Consider what Burns's longevity means for the people around him in a different sense. Every person who has worked for Burns over the course of his century-plus tenure has watched him outlive them. Smithers's father worked for Burns. There are implications in several episodes that the relationship between the Smithers family and Burns extends back further than the current Smithers himself. Burns has watched generations of Springfield residents age, slow, and die while he continued operating from the same office. He has attended funerals of people who were young when he was already old. He has processed the deaths of associates, adversaries, politicians, and community members across an extended period that makes the ordinary human relationship with mortality feel compressed and rapid by comparison. This gives Burns a relationship with time that is fundamentally different from everyone else in Springfield. When he makes a long-term plan, long-term means something different to him than it does to Homer or Marge or Smithers. Burns can wait decades for a specific outcome. He has done it before. He maintained his grudge against Mona Simpson for 27 years with the patient confidence of someone who knows they will still be around to see the resolution. He structured the deal with Grandpa Simpson over Homer's employment as a hedge that he knew would pay off across a time frame most people would not be willing to wait through. Burns's patience is not just strategic, it is biological. He can afford to wait because he expects to still be there when the waiting ends. The normal human relationship with urgency, with the sense that time is finite and opportunities must be seized before they close, does not apply to him in the same way. He operates with the confidence of someone who knows the clock does not tick for him the way it ticks for everyone else. And this is ultimately what makes Burns not just dangerous but singular in Springfield's universe. He is not merely the most powerful person in the town. He is the only person in the town for whom the future is genuinely long-term. Everyone else is playing a game with a time horizon measured in years or decades. Burns is playing a game measured in centuries, and he has been winning it for as long as anyone can remember, which, given how long Burns has been around, is a very long time indeed. Section 5. The principal who never was. Let your breathing slow a little more. Let your body settle. We are going to spend some time with an episode that fans of The Simpsons have called, consistently and emphatically across nearly 30 years, one of the worst the show ever produced. The one that broke the show. The one that represented a fundamental betrayal of the audience's trust. Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper. Aired the 28th of September, 1997. The backlash was immediate and intense, and has never fully subsided. I want to suggest that the fans have been reading this episode in the wrong direction. This episode did not break The Simpsons. It told the truth about Springfield, clearly and without softening, for the first and only time in the show's history. It pulled back the curtain on the mechanism by which the town maintains its impossible reality, showed the audience the vote and the decree and the exile, made the invisible machinery visible for the first time. And the fans who love the show reacted with disgust and anger because the machinery, when you see it operating in the light, is genuinely disturbing. The premise: Springfield Elementary holds a ceremony honoring Principal Skinner's 20 years of service. A stranger arrives in the middle of the celebration and introduces himself as the real Seymour Skinner, a Vietnam veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war and believed killed, who survived, escaped after years of captivity, and came home to find someone else living his life for 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is not Seymour Skinner. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, a street kid with no stable identity and no particular future. Drafted, served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and assumed dead, Tamzarian traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother Agnes. Agnes, who needed her son to have survived, assumed the young man at her door was Seymour. Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or a home or an identity that felt like something worth holding, did not correct her. He became Seymour Skinner. Took the name, the rank, the relationships, the mother, the life, inhabited the borrowed identity for 20 years until the real Skinner walked through a gymnasium door and the fiction collapsed. Now, here is where Springfield does something extraordinary. And here is why the episode matters beyond its reputation as a continuity failure. The town holds a meeting. The real Seymour Skinner is present. Tamzarian is present. The evidence of the fraud is overwhelming and unambiguous. Everyone in Springfield knows that their principal is not who he has claimed to be, and the town does not deliberate long. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree. Armin Tamzarian is legally and permanently Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the real one, the war veteran who survived years of captivity and came home with a reasonable expectation of having his identity returned, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. The judge makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever speak the truth about what happened again. The truth is exiled. The person carrying the truth is removed. The comfortable fiction is restored with the force of law. Fans hated this. The criticism was understandable as a response to what the episode meant for characterization and continuity. Harry Shearer expressed his displeasure publicly. The episode has been consistently ranked among the series' worst. Critics argued that it destroyed everything the audience had invested in Skinner's character by revealing it was built on a fiction. The military service, the relationship with Agnes, the dynamic with Bart, the entire personality, all constructed on a stolen identity. The criticism is legitimate as far as it goes. But here's what the critical response missed entirely. The episode is not doing something new to Springfield. It is documenting what Springfield has always done, and it is showing you the mechanism in operation for the first and only time. The vote is not unusual. The vote happens every week, invisibly, in the space between episodes, whenever the town experiences something that should permanently alter its reality and instead simply does not appear in the following week's episode. Every catastrophe that fails to leave a mark, every disaster that should change everything and changes nothing. Every time Springfield experiences something world-altering, and by the next episode, everything is exactly as it was before. The vote is always being taken. The decree is always being issued. The inconvenient reality is always being exiled. This episode is the only time the show let the audience watch all of it happen in real time and in the open. Consider the chain of economic consequence that makes the town's denial rational from inside the town's perspective. If Springfield acknowledged what the plant has been doing to the water, it would have to challenge Burns. If it challenged Burns, the economy would destabilize. If the economy destabilized, the town would lose the foundation of everything it runs on. The people of Springfield have learned, through years of practice and through the neurological effects of the contamination itself, that certain truths are too expensive to absorb. The comfortable lie is not merely more pleasant than the uncomfortable truth. In a specific and material sense, it is more affordable. Maintaining the fiction of the plant's safety is less costly than confronting what the plant has actually been doing. This is why Springfield forgets the dome. Why it forgets Blinky, the glowing employer. The catastrophes that should have changed everything and changed nothing. Not because the radiation has simply damaged everyone's memory function, though that may also be true. Because the population has made a collective decision, renewed continuously and without formal vote in most cases, that remembering is something they cannot afford. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode where the show made the vote visible, where the collective decision to maintain the comfortable fiction was put to an explicit vote rather than allowed to operate in the dark. And the fans reacted with rage to seeing it performed openly, not recognizing that what they were seeing was the same process that makes every other episode's reset possible. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's most dangerous kind of visitor. He arrived with provable truth about a community member's official identity, and his presence made maintenance of the comfortable fiction impossible without active effort. Springfield's response was to eliminate the truth and remove the person carrying it. He was tied to a train, expelled from his own life, made into an example. And the judge made the lesson explicit by criminalizing the memory of what happened. Anyone who remembers too much in Springfield, anyone who insists on the truth over the agreed-upon version of events, risks the fate of the last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. The real Seymour Skinner is still out there somewhere. Still the only person in Springfield who is telling the truth, still exiled for it. The Principal and the Pauper also raises a question that applies to every reset in the show's history. What does it cost the people of Springfield to maintain these collective fictions? The psychological literature on communities that practice sustained denial of shared reality suggests that the cost is real and accumulating. Maintaining a lie requires cognitive resources. It requires the continuous suppression of contrary information. It requires the management of any situation that might surface the suppressed truth. Over time, these requirements become part of the baseline cognitive load of simply living in the community. Springfield's residents are not just ignoring the truth about the plant and the contamination and the fraudulent principal and the glowing employer. They are actively working to not know these things, which is different from simply not knowing them. They have absorbed the truth at some level and are managing it. And that management takes resources, and those resources are not available for anything else. This is what the radiation theory and the collective denial theory converge on. The radiation has impaired the cognitive function of the population, and the cognitive function that remains is largely occupied with the work of maintaining the shared fictions that keep the town functional. The population of Springfield is not merely cognitively diminished, it is cognitively occupied, busy with the work of not knowing, which leaves very little capacity for the work of understanding. Springfield's collective denial is not a symptom of stupidity. It is a symptom of the specific cognitive burden imposed by having to simultaneously know something and maintain not knowing it. The town is, in a very real sense, working very hard all the time, just not on the things that would improve its situation. Number. Section 6. Maggie Simpson. She does not speak. She cannot walk reliably without falling. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And in that time, through all of that silence and apparent helplessness, she has accomplished more than every other member of her family measured against any standard that actually matters. She shot the most powerful man in Springfield and was never charged. She organized and led a successful rebellion against a tyrannical daycare administrator. She has intervened in multiple life-threatening situations to protect her family, each intervention executed correctly and without hesitation and without announcement. She has been tested and found to possess cognitive abilities that the testing instruments in question were not calibrated to measure accurately because they were designed for ordinary children rather than for whatever Maggie Simpson actually is. She does all of this while maintaining, without a single break in character across 36 years, the most effective cover available to her. Ordinary infancy, helpless, dependent, communicating through pacifier sounds and enormous watchful eyes. She is none of those things. She has never been any of those things. And she has spent 3 decades ensuring that nobody around her figures this out. Begin with the Burns shooting, because it is the act that defines her in the public memory of the show, even though it may be the least interesting thing she has done. Whether or not Maggie was the one who pulled the trigger, what she does in the final seconds of the episode's resolution tells you everything you need to understand about who she is and how she operates. The family has left the hospital room. Maggie is alone. She does not immediately relax into passive infancy. She scans the room first. A deliberate, methodical scan of each corner, each doorway, each angle from which she could be observed. She is confirming that no one is watching. Once she has confirmed her privacy, she moves her pacifier in a gesture that exactly mimics the action of pulling a trigger. The show presents this as confession. She did it, and here is the private gesture that proves she knows she did it. But examine the behavioral sequence. What cognitive capacities does it require? It requires theory of mind, the understanding that other people have perspectives and awareness distinct from your own, and that their presence or absence in a space changes what is safe to do in that space. It requires strategic assessment of whether the space is actually private before proceeding. It requires the decision that certain behaviors are exclusively for private performance. These are not capacities associated with typical one-year-olds. The developmental milestone of theory of mind arrives in most children around age 4, and its expression at the level of behavioral sophistication demonstrated in this scene would be remarkable in a much older child. The alternative reading. Maggie was in that parking lot. She witnessed something. The gesture is not a confession of what she did. It is a reenactment of what she saw. She has filed the memory in the internal archive she has been building since before she could sit up unassisted, and she is reviewing it privately, the way she reviews everything, because private review is safe and public revelation is not. The Longest Daycare, the Academy Award-nominated theatrical short, is the clearest sustained window the show has ever provided into what is actually happening behind Maggie's eyes. She is left at a daycare facility with authoritarian management. She finds a caterpillar she wants to protect. A larger, aggressive infant intends to destroy it. What follows is a complete, precisely executed, multi-stage plan accomplished without assistance, without speech, in total silence, by a body that cannot walk 10 feet without falling. She reads the physical environment at the outset, mapping the space and identifying what can be used and what represents an obstacle. She models the bully infant's likely behavior and develops strategy that accounts for his predictable responses to various stimuli. She executes her plan in sequential stages, adapting in real time when circumstances deviate from expectation. She predicts adult behavior accurately enough to route around adult interference before it materializes. Every decision is correct, every move is optimized. Her intelligence is operating at a level her motor development cannot keep pace with. She compensates for every physical limitation through cognitive capacity that simply should not exist in a one-year-old under any circumstances, in any theoretical model of child development. She succeeds, completely and cleanly. The caterpillar is released, the bully is outmaneuvered, the adults are none the wiser. Maggie walks away, falls down, gets back up, and resumes her cover. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly on several occasions. The results carry a consistent implication even as the specific details vary between episodes. Extraordinary, beyond the calibrated range of the available instruments, beyond what the testers expected to encounter. The show plays these moments as quick jokes and moves on immediately. But the accumulation across many episodes is not incidental. It is documentation. Maggie's extraordinary cognitive capacity is a persistent, established feature of her character that the show keeps presenting and then immediately stepping away from. The silence is the character. Not a supporting trait, the defining one. She is surrounded by one of the most relentlessly verbal families in television history. Homer narrates his own experience continuously, a running external monologue on every sensation and reaction. Marge processes her emotional life aloud. Bart is perpetually provoking responses from everyone around him. Lisa lectures, advocates, argues, and declaims, projecting her intelligence outward as a continuous signal of her presence. The Simpson household is a sustained wall of language, a flow of words and negotiations and declarations conducted entirely in the audible range. In the middle of all of this, Maggie sits, silent, watching. She has been watching Lisa specifically, and what she has observed in 36 years of watching her older sister is a comprehensive and detailed education in what happens to visible intelligence in this particular environment. Lisa is brilliant. This is established fact, and what Lisa's brilliance has produced for her is a specific and exhausting pattern. Isolation, dismissal, the particular fatigue of being consistently the most capable person in a room that neither wants nor rewards that capability. Lisa raises her hand and is told she is being difficult. She challenges authority and is told she is naive. She announces what she is capable of, and the community around her responds by treating that capability as a problem to be managed rather than an asset to be used. Maggie watched this happen since she was born. She observed, with the careful, systematic attention that is her defining trait, what happens to the person in her immediate environment who refuses to conceal what she can do. She absorbed the lesson that Lisa keeps choosing not to learn, possibly because Maggie learned it earlier and has been living by it longer and with more complete commitment. The lesson is not that intelligence is worthless. The lesson is that visible intelligence in this specific context is a liability. That announcing what you are capable of makes you a target for the forces that find capability threatening. That the costs of visibility exceed the benefits in this town with this specific community. Maggie's response: strategic invisibility. The less they notice you, the more you can accomplish. The more completely you perform the expected, the more freedom you have in the spaces where you are not being watched. Consider the results of this strategy. Every significant thing Maggie has done, she has done without announcement, without credit, in the margins where the adults are occupied with something else, and the baby is assumed to be doing what babies do. Burns was shot and the investigation focused on the adults because who suspects a baby? The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every rescue, every intervention, every extraordinary act has occurred in exactly the space where her cover was believed. She is the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace. She has been for 36 years. She has ensured that nobody knows this by performing ordinary infancy with a consistency and a patience that is itself extraordinary. And what she is building toward, in the quiet behind the pacifier, behind those enormous watching eyes, is still unknown. The show has never answered this question. Maybe that is the most frightening thing about Maggie. Not what she has done, what she is still deciding to do. The question of whether Maggie's extraordinary intelligence is a result of the radiation or something else is worth examining. The radiation theory predicts that the contamination has biological effects that vary between individuals. Homer's effect is cognitive diminishment, but biological mutation is not uniform in its direction. The same mutagen that reduces function in one system might amplify function in another, depending on the specific biological context in which it operates. If the contamination has amplified Maggie's cognitive function rather than diminishing it, she represents the opposite pole from Homer on the spectrum of what the radiation has done to the Simpson family. Homer is what radiation-induced cognitive damage looks like at one extreme: reduced intelligence, impaired executive function, compromised long-term planning. Maggie is what radiation-amplified cognitive function might look like at another extreme: extraordinary intelligence in a body that cannot yet support it, cognitive capacities so far beyond developmental norms that the body's motor development cannot keep pace with the mind operating it. They are, in the theory, two sides of the same radiological process: the same contaminated environment, the same family, the same water and air. But where it took something from Homer, it gave something to Maggie, and what it gave her is operating at a level that has no human equivalent in the show's universe. There is also the possibility that Maggie's silence is not entirely strategic, that some part of it is protective, not protective of her cover, but protective of the people around her. Maggie has been watching her family for 36 years. She understands them with a precision and a completeness that none of them understand themselves. She knows exactly how much of what she is capable of her family could absorb without being profoundly destabilized by it. She knows what Homer's reaction to discovering the true extent of her intelligence would be. She knows what Lisa would feel, the complicated mixture of pride and recognition and perhaps grief that the family's genuinely gifted child had learned to hide her gifts while Lisa had spent a lifetime fighting to have hers acknowledged. Maggie is not just protecting herself with her silence, she is protecting all of them. She is calibrating her concealment to the specific emotional needs of the specific people around her, which is itself an act of extraordinary cognitive sophistication and extraordinary love. Number. Section 7. The predictions. The screenshots move through social media with the regularity of weather updates. A frame from an episode that aired in 1994 next to a headline from 2023. Something that should not have been possible to anticipate, sitting in a cartoon that aired decades before the thing it apparently predicted. The feeling the comparison produces is specific. Not quite surprise anymore after you have seen enough of them. Something more like the uncanny. The sense that you are looking at something that cannot be coincidence and cannot quite be explained. Let us go through the most prominent examples. In 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa had become the first female president. Her immediate predecessor in the Oval Office was identified as Donald Trump. The episode showed this as satire about celebrity culture and the directions American politics was capable of moving. 16 years later, Trump won the 2016 presidential election. Screenshots circulated globally within hours. People who had not thought about The Simpsons in years asked the same question. How did they know? In 1995, a character appeared wearing a wrist-mounted computing device that communicated information, mapping onto the smartwatches that entered consumer markets approximately 20 years later. In 1994, Homer went to space with Buzz Aldrin as part of a commercial operation, anticipating the commercial space tourism that began arriving as a serious industry in the years that followed. In 1998, a chalkboard gag included mathematics that physicists have noted resembles calculations related to the Higgs boson particle, whose existence was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. In 1993, a flu virus originating in Asia spread to Springfield, producing mass panic, supply shortages, and the specific combination of institutional paralysis and public anxiety that the world watched in 2020. During that fictional outbreak, a swarm of killer bees was accidentally released, which felt strangely echoed when Asian giant hornets began appearing in the northwestern United States during the actual pandemic that same year. Two separate fictional details from one 1993 episode, finding their real-world counterparts simultaneously, 27 years later. In 1996, a joke had Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. In 1998, the show depicted Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox. In 2019, Disney completed that exact acquisition. Across dozens of episodes, the show depicted video calling, autocorrect failures, smartwatches, and surveillance culture years before any of these became ordinary parts of daily life. The people who make the show have addressed this phenomenon consistently. Al Jean. If you throw enough darts, you will hit some bullseyes. Bill Oakley. Most of these are coincidences produced by the show's enormous output over a long period, combined with the cyclical nature of history in which similar situations recur. Fact-checking organizations have found mundane explanations for most of the popular claims. The Trump prediction did not require special knowledge. Trump had been publicly exploring a presidential run since the late 1980s. Writing a joke in 2000 about the logical endpoint of celebrity politics required careful observation of what was already visible, not prophecy. The Disney-Fox prediction did not require special knowledge. Media consolidation was an accelerating trend with an obvious direction. The smartwatch prediction did not require special knowledge. Personal technology was visibly getting smaller and more integrated with daily life. The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically been among the most credentialed in American television. Multiple writers hold advanced degrees from elite universities. Significant numbers have backgrounds in mathematics, physics, economics, and political science. These are not people generating random guesses about the future. They are trained observers of how systems work and where trajectories lead, who spend their professional lives analyzing patterns and extending them toward their logical conclusions. What looks like prediction is, from inside the room where the episodes are written, careful observation of the present extended a step or two forward. This explains most of the phenomenon, not quite all of it. Some coincidences are specific enough that trend extrapolation cannot fully account for them. The Trump episode specified Trump by name and included a visual of him descending an escalator that maps onto his actual 2015 campaign announcement, with a precision that sits outside the comfortable range of the pure coincidence. Explanation. The Siegfried and Roy episode depicted a white tiger attacking a performer specifically, which is what happened in 2003. This is where the most interesting reading becomes available. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons helps to produce it. Not through special knowledge or prophecy, through the specific, deep, generationally persistent way that a piece of media becomes part of a culture's shared imaginative vocabulary. The Simpsons has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations are embedded in the language. Its characters are cultural archetypes. It is not merely entertainment. It is part of the framework through which a significant portion of the American public understands American culture. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. It becomes a reference point. It makes the idea feel like something that has already been processed, already imagined, already accepted as a known possibility. When the possibility becomes reality, the audience experiences recognition rather than shock. The Simpsons already did this. It felt familiar because the culture had been living with the image for 16 years. When satire depicts a trajectory as inevitable, it normalizes that trajectory. It reduces the psychological resistance that might otherwise slow or redirect it. The show did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. It made the merger feel like the obvious direction of travel and may have made it easier to accept when it arrived. The culture had already processed it as a foregone conclusion. There is a final dimension worth naming directly. The Simpsons has also made thousands of predictions that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks and flying cars and technologies that were projected as near-future certainties and never materialized. Political scenarios that moved in the opposite direction. Cultural shifts that simply did not happen. Nobody circulates screenshots of those. The mechanism of social sharing is not neutral. Content that produces the feeling of "they predicted it" travels fast. Failed predictions accumulate in the archive, unseen and collectively forgotten. Filter 800 episodes through this mechanism, and what emerges is a highlight reel that looks like prophecy, even though it represents only the successful fraction of a much larger output. The predictions are not supernatural. They are the natural result of a brilliantly long-running show, staffed by highly educated observers of American culture, running for an impossibly long time, producing more satirical content than any comparable series in television history, filtered through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever created. The internet, which remembers the hits and forgets the misses until the hits feel like a pattern. But even knowing exactly how the effect is produced, it remains genuinely impressive to stand in front of 800 episodes, 36 years. Enough accurate observations about the direction of American culture to make even the people who wrote them occasionally wonder whether they know something they should not. The show's predictions have also become a self-referential phenomenon in a way that deserves acknowledgement. The reputation of The Simpsons as a prophetic text has itself become a cultural fact that influences how people receive news events. When something happens in the world that resembles something from an old Simpsons episode, the comparison to the show is now made before the news cycle has even fully processed the event. The show's predictive reputation has become part of how cultural events are processed. This creates a feedback loop. The show's reputation for prediction makes people more likely to notice and share apparent predictions. The sharing amplifies the reputation. The amplified reputation makes people even more likely to notice and share apparent predictions. And so the phenomenon grows, driven not by any increase in the show's actual predictive capacity but by the accumulated cultural weight of the reputation itself. There is something genuinely interesting in this about the relationship between satire and reality over a long enough time frame. Satire works by exaggerating real tendencies to make them visible and ridiculous. But if the satire runs long enough, and the real tendencies continue developing, the satire eventually catches up with what reality has become. The gap between the exaggeration and the thing being exaggerated closes. The joke and the reality become the same statement. The Simpsons has been running long enough that some of its exaggerations are no longer exaggerations. Some of the things it depicted as the reductio ad absurdum of American cultural trends have become ordinary features of American life. The corrupt billionaire who owns the town's infrastructure and uses it as personal leverage. The population too distracted and too dependent to challenge him. The government that seals a contaminated town under a dome rather than addressing the cause of the contamination. These were satire in 1989. Whether they still function as satire in 2025 is a question. The show's continued cultural relevance is implicitly asking. Section 8. Mona Simpson. There is a conspiracy running through 3 generations of the Simpson family that most viewers encounter as backstory and emotional revelation and never quite recognize as a conspiracy. It is presented as character history, as the kind of rich origin story that sophisticated long-running shows use to deepen their protagonists, and it is those things, but it is also something more deliberate and more troubling. a picture of 3 generations systematically broken by one man's decision to pursue a personal grievance rather than let a single incident go. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. This was not presented as a mystery or a gap in the narrative. It was stated fact, established early. Abe told Homer, when Homer was too young to question the telling, that his mother had passed away. Abe showed Homer a grave. Homer absorbed the loss in the way a small child absorbs an adult loss, incompletely, with a grief that does not have the vocabulary to fully express itself, and so settles into the body as a persistent, low-level ache. This belief shaped Homer in ways that run under everything else about his character. The desperate need for approval from people who are not giving it. The clinginess toward Marge that is also, underneath the comedy, a quiet terror of abandonment. The willingness to absorb humiliation from Burns rather than risk losing the job, because the job is part of the stability that keeps the family intact. The compulsive need to be liked, to have his name remembered, to be acknowledged as present. These traits are the behavioral signature of a man who lost his mother in childhood and never had the resources to process it, who built an adult personality partly around the wound that absence left. In Season 7, Mother Simpson revealed that Mona was alive. She had not died. She had been driven underground by a combination of federal pursuit and her own commitment to staying away from anyone her presence could endanger. Abe had been presenting a different person's grave as hers for 30 years. Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been passing off a famous writer's headstone as his wife's burial site for Homer's entire life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, where she has come to visit what she believes is her son's grave, having been told he died. She does not recognize the adult man Homer has become. He has to prove who he is. And when the recognition happens, the show produces one of its most genuinely moving passages. A grown man and the mother he thought dead, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them, carrying between them 27 years of absence that cannot be recovered or returned. Then Mona explains what actually happened. It was 1969. She was a housewife in Springfield, married to Abe, mother to a young Homer. Something in the upheaval of the time reached her. She joined a group of activists. Their target was not abstract or politically distant. It was local and concrete. A laboratory owned by Charles Montgomery Burns operated as a facility for producing biological weapons. Weaponized pathogens, in the town where her son was growing up, manufactured a short distance from the homes of people who had no idea the richest man in their community was running a germ warfare operation nearby. Mona's group broke in. They detonated an antibiotic bomb designed to neutralize the stored biological agents without harming anyone inside. The raid succeeded. The weapons were destroyed. The group fled. Except Mona did not quite clear the facility cleanly. Someone had been knocked down in the chaos of the escape. She stopped to help them. She stopped because that was the kind of person she was, the kind who helps someone who has fallen even in the middle of something dangerous. The person she helped was Burns. He looked up from the floor of his destroyed laboratory and saw her face. He reported her to the FBI. A federal warrant was issued with remarkable speed, and from that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact Abe in any way that would not expose him to federal risk. She could not hold Homer. She kissed him goodbye while he slept and disappeared from his life. For 27 years, Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she had died, and Homer spent 3 decades building, from that absence, everything the show has documented about his character. The conspiracy dimension is in what Burns did after Mona fled. He did not file the report and move on. He pursued her, actively and continuously, with the full resources of a man of his wealth and connections, across decades of her careful management of her own movements. When Mona returns to Springfield in the episode, after 27 years of extraordinary caution, Burns spots her through a cab window within moments of her arrival. He contacts the authorities. The FBI appears at the Simpson house within the episode's timeline. Mona has to flee again. Burns has been maintaining active watch for her across the entire period of her absence. This is not the behavior of someone who filed a report and considered the matter settled. This is a grudge sustained with the patience and resources of someone who has both in unlimited supply. 27 years of watching for her. 27 years of keeping the infrastructure of pursuit active. 27 years of ensuring that if she ever came back, the system was in place to expel her again. Homer works for Burns. He has worked for Burns his entire adult life. His paycheck, his job security, his family's financial foundation all come from the man who destroyed his family. And Homer cannot make this connection. He cannot hold both facts simultaneously and derive their implication. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of cognitive limitation mean the architecture of his own suffering is invisible to him. The show does not play this as comedy, it plays it as tragedy. Homer's inability to understand is not funny, it is devastating. A later episode adds the structural piece that completes the picture. Burns committed a crime. Abe discovered evidence of it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer's employment at the plant in perpetuity, regardless of performance. 742 documented errors without permanent termination. Homer's job security was never about his value to the organization. It was the product of a secret deal struck between his father and his mother's persecutor, with Homer's employment as the currency of the transaction. Homer does not know this. He has never known this. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the man responsible and buried the truth. Homer inherited the consequences and never understood why his life felt heavy in the specific way it always has. Burns won. He won the way people with infinite patience and infinite resources almost always win in the end, by outlasting everyone who tried to hold him accountable. Mona died in a later season. Homer sat beside her and held her hand and watched her slip away. The show handled this moment without comedy, without cutaway, without reset. Just a son and his mother and the weight of 27 years pressing down on both of them in that room. 3 generations broken by one man's grudge. And Homer drives home from the plant every evening, past the cooling towers, grateful for a stability he does not know the true price of, carrying the weight of all of it without understanding what he is carrying or where it came from. The Mona Simpson story also illuminates something important about the Burns shooting case that most analyses miss. In the Season 7 episode where Mona returns to Springfield, Burns recognizes her almost immediately. He is watching for her. After 27 years of her careful self-concealment, he spots her through a cab window. The quality of his attention to this particular threat, the sustained vigilance across decades, tells you something about how Burns manages personal grievances. He does not forget, he does not forgive. He does not move on to more pressing concerns. He maintains the infrastructure of his response to a perceived slight across timeframes that most people would never sustain. When someone wrongs Burns or threatens his interests, the response is not proportional and it is not time-limited. It is permanent, sustained, and backed by all the resources he can bring to bear. Apply this to the Burns shooting case. Burns was shot, nearly killed, and spent time in a coma recovering from the attempt. The official resolution named Maggie as the shooter and closed the case. Burns accepted this. He did not press further. He did not use his resources to reinvestigate, to find a different answer, to pursue the person who had actually shot him with the same relentless vigilance he applied to Mona Simpson for 27 years. Why not? The most charitable explanation is that Burns genuinely believed Maggie shot him and was satisfied with an answer that could not produce prosecution. But the less charitable explanation, the one that fits with everything we know about Burns's character and his sustained capacity for grievance and his relationship with Marge Simpson through the lens of the episode where he fell for her, is that he knew exactly who shot him and chose not to say. If Burns chose to protect the shooter, it was not out of kindness. Burns does not operate from kindness. It was a calculation. Either the shooter had information or leverage that made exposure undesirable, or Burns's feelings for that person were genuine enough to override his usual instinct for comprehensive retaliation. Both possibilities are consistent with different readings of his character. Either way, the official answer serves everyone who needed the case to close without a prosecutable perpetrator. And in Springfield, when the powerful need something to stop being examined, it reliably stops being examined. Section 9. Where is Springfield? Let your eyes go heavy. We are going to try to find Springfield on a map tonight, and the search is going to take us somewhere interesting, even though the destination remains what it has always been. Everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The public record says Oregon. Matt Groening stated in a 2012 Smithsonian interview that he named the town for Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up nearby, and chose the name partly because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, present in enough states that it could feel locally familiar to viewers almost anywhere. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery appeared solved. Springfield was in Oregon, And then the show continued airing, and the episodes that followed placed Springfield in geographic contexts impossible for Oregon. The writers did not honor the confession. Springfield resumed its usual practice of being everywhere and nowhere, exactly as it had been before. The show has spent 36 years contradicting itself about Springfield's location with a consistency that cannot be accidental. Every time a clue narrows the possibilities, another clue in a subsequent episode makes the previous clue logically untenable. Springfield is in the north. It is in the south. It has ocean access and it is landlocked. It borders Ohio in one episode, Nevada in another, Maine in a third, Kentucky in a fourth. It has mountains and desert and farmland and coast all within driving distance. No actual American location has all of these features simultaneously. The surface reading, Springfield is designed to feel universal. A town that cannot be definitively located in any single region can feel familiar to viewers everywhere. The geographic impossibility is the point. Springfield belongs to everyone because it is rooted nowhere specific. This is a genuine explanation, confirmed by the people who made the show. It is also not the only available reading. If the radiation theory is correct, if Springfield is a contamination zone whose physical laws have been warped by decades of nuclear exposure, there is no compelling reason why geography should be exempt. If the residents of Springfield can have altered physiology and collective cognitive impairment, why should the physical landscape of the town conform to the geographic logic of the real American continent surrounding it? The contamination does not merely affect biology. Perhaps it affects space. Perhaps the environmental damage has compressed geographic features that should be separated by hundreds of miles into a single impossible location, a place that cannot be mapped because it does not conform to cartographic logic. If the coma theory is correct, Springfield's geographic impossibility resolves elegantly. Homer's sleeping mind does not contain a precise map of America. It contains memories, fragmentary impressions of places he has visited, filtered through years of experience and colored by the emotional associations each place carries. Mountains from a vacation, ocean from a drive along a coast, desert from a movie or a television program, small-town insularity from something in his childhood. His dreaming brain assembled Springfield from these fragments without geographic logic, because dreams follow emotional logic rather than cartographic reality. Springfield feels like America because it is assembled from everything Homer has ever felt about America, held together by longing rather than geography. If the collective denial theory is correct, Springfield's geographic ambiguity serves a practical legal function. You cannot serve regulatory documents on a facility whose jurisdiction changes between episodes. You cannot bring federal environmental charges against a nuclear plant if the state it operates in is perpetually ambiguous. You cannot hold anyone accountable for violations in a town you cannot definitively locate. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means a fixed jurisdiction. A fixed jurisdiction means consistent oversight. Consistent oversight means someone might eventually show up with a map and a badge and start asking systematic questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the billionaire who has personal memories of the Spanish-American War. The episode Behind the Laughter, a Season 12 mockumentary, finally named Springfield's location in the original broadcast, Northern Kentucky. In subsequent syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state. The definitive answer to Springfield's location changes depending on which broadcast version of the same episode you watch. Even when the show commits to an answer, the answer does not hold across all versions of itself. A town that can be found is a town that can be held accountable. Springfield is structurally resistant to being found. It belongs to everyone and answers to no jurisdiction. It floats, placeless and permanent, somewhere in the American imagination, too familiar to dismiss and too impossible to locate. That is exactly where it will stay. There is one more reading of Springfield's geographic instability worth considering, and it connects to the show's relationship with its own identity over time. The Simpsons began as a specific show set in a specific kind of American town. The Springfield of the early seasons had a geographic coherence, even if it was never precisely located. The town felt like it had a fixed size, a fixed relationship to the surrounding landscape, a fixed sense of its own place in the world. As the show aged and the floating timeline dragged its cultural references forward, Springfield aged too, in a sense. Not in the way its residents aged, because they did not age. but in the sense that the town accumulated the residue of 36 years of episodes set in it. The Springfield of 2025 is, narratively, a very cluttered place. It contains the ruins of every storyline the show has ever run, every established location, every character that has ever been introduced. The geography of Springfield has expanded to contain all of this accumulated history, even as the show has refused to acknowledge that any time has passed. This creates a particular kind of geographic impossibility that is different from the show's deliberate regional ambiguity. Springfield does not just float between states. It also floats between versions of itself. The Springfield that has a harbor and the Springfield that is landlocked. The Springfield with mountains and the Springfield with flat plains. These are not merely the result of different writers' different assumptions about where the town is located. They are the accumulated geography of a show that has been world-building without a consistent map for 36 years. Springfield cannot be found on a map because Springfield is not a place. It is a story, and stories, unlike places, can contain their own contradictions. They can be mountainous and coastal simultaneously. They can border 4 different states without any of the borders being wrong. They can be everywhere and nowhere, because their reality is not geographic. It is narrative. Springfield exists wherever the story needs it to exist, which is, depending on the episode, everywhere in America. And that is what makes the town so persistent. Not its geography, its story. You cannot shut down a story by finding it on a map. You cannot serve a regulatory notice on a narrative. Springfield will always be wherever the story is happening, and the story, as we have established, is not going to stop. Number? Section 10. The floating timeline. Let everything slow now. Let your breathing settle into something long and deep. Let the weight of your body press gently into whatever is holding it. We have arrived at the last of the great mysteries, the one that sits underneath all the others and makes every theory in this conversation necessary. Nobody in Springfield ages. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when the show debuted on the 17th of December 1989. He is 10 years old right now, in whatever year you are watching this. Lisa was 8 then and is 8 now. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s at the beginning, and they are in their mid-30s still. Maggie was 1 year old then. She is 1 year old tonight. 36 years have passed in the world where you live. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The industry calls this a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are experiencing 2025. When the same family aired in 1995, they were experiencing 1995. The calendar advances, the cultural references update, and the characters do not move at all. They exist in a state of permanent temporal suspension, locked in the ages they occupied when the show began, living through decades of world change without any of it accumulating in their bodies or their histories. Most viewers accept this without sustained analysis. It is a convention of long-running animation, but The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has cracked at the seams in ways that become visible when you examine them. The most visible fracture involves Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their youth was grounded in the late 1970s and early 1980s, consistent with parents in their mid-30s during the late 1980s. But if they are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they were teenagers in approximately 2007, not 1978. Their formative years were defined not by Watergate or disco, but by MySpace and early YouTube. The show has addressed this drift by revising its flashback episodes over the years. Homer and Marge's depicted youth has been relocated from the 1970s to the 1990s to the 2000s, to something approaching the 2010s. Their love story remains constant. The era it is set in keeps sliding forward to match the arithmetic of the floating timeline. Their memories are not stable. Their history is a draft that keeps getting revised to maintain the fiction of a permanent present. They do not have a fixed past. They have approximations, whatever backstory is needed for the current episode to work. Every theory we have examined tonight arrives at this phenomenon and offers its own account. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man who went to sleep in April 1993. His brain cannot age his children because it has no information about who they become after that date. The floating timeline is Homer's coma made visible. The world held still at the last moment he knew it. The radiation theory says nobody ages because the contamination from the power plant has altered the cellular biology of Springfield's residents at such a fundamental level that normal aging processes have been disrupted. The collective denial theory says nobody ages because Springfield has agreed not to notice. The same community that voted to maintain a fraudulent identity and made truthfulness illegal is a community capable of agreeing, without formal announcement, that the passage of time is something they are not going to acknowledge. The Burns immortality theory says that at least one person in Springfield has demonstrably found a way to extend his lifespan through medical technology and wealth, which means the concept of inevitable biological aging is already negotiable in this universe. All four theories arrive at the same conclusion through different paths. Time does not work normally in Springfield. The floating timeline is not a production convenience. It is a symptom of something broken at the level of how this town relates to temporal reality. The show has proven it can imagine its characters aging. Lisa's Wedding, from Season 6, depicts a future Springfield in which Lisa is 23, a fully realized adult who has become precisely the person the show has always been building toward. The episode is emotionally precise and demonstrates full command of who these characters would be if time were permitted to do what time does. And then Lisa is 8 years old again in the following episode. The glimpse closes. The future is locked away. The permanent present resumes. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. And this refusal mirrors something in the audience's relationship with the characters that is worth naming directly. The Simpsons has been the American family in the cultural imagination for 36 years. Not an idealized version, the reference family. The one that exists in the shared cultural space as the recognizable instance of what American domestic life is, in all its messiness and warmth and dysfunction and endurance. For the show to allow this family to age, for Bart to go to college, and Lisa to leave Springfield, and Maggie to find her voice, and Homer to retire, and Marge to stand in an empty house on Evergreen Terrace, would be for the show to become something different from what it is. Not a comedy about a family. An elegy for one. The story of a family that ran out of time. The audience does not want that story. The audience has never wanted that story. We want the version where the kids are still young and the parents are still together and the house looks the same and the couch gag plays and Homer finds his way home by the end. We would feel something like grief if Bart turned 11, if Lisa's saxophone playing led somewhere definitive, if Maggie finally spoke with the full weight of everything she has been holding. The floating timeline is the mechanism that prevents all of that, and it is maintained not only by the production team's choices but by the audience's expectations. We tune in expecting the family to be where we left them. We press the pause button every week and the show honors that request. Every week the family is exactly where we need them to be. Because aging means change. Change means something ending. Something ending means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are different from who we were when we started watching, that the couch we sat on as children when the opening theme played for the first time is gone or somewhere else, and the person who sat on it has become someone else too. As long as the Simpsons do not age, we do not have to admit any of that. As long as the opening credits roll and Springfield is right where we left it, we have somewhere to return to that is always the same. The house on Evergreen Terrace. The family. The loop that started in 1989 and has not stopped. The floating timeline is not their prison. It is ours. We built it around them to protect ourselves from the version of the story that ends. And we maintain it year by year, tuning in to confirm that the walls are still standing and the family is still intact and nobody has aged past the ages we need them to be. They are trapped in the loop because we put them there. And every time we come back, every time we laugh at a joke from an episode that aired before most of the audience was born, every time we feel at home in a house that does not appear on any map, we tighten the loop a little more. We make it a little harder for the Simpsons to escape. But if they escaped, if the timeline stopped floating and started landing, if Bart turned 11 and Lisa turned 9 and Maggie finally said her second word and meant it, the show would become the story of time passing and people changing and families growing apart in the natural way of things. And that story, true as it is not what we come here for. We come here for the house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young. We come here for Homer, stumbling through the door at 5:30 after another day that was simultaneously catastrophic and ordinary. We come here for Marge, patient and slightly worried and deeply committed to the family she holds together without anyone noticing how much effort the holding takes. We come here for the couch and the television and the loop that lets us visit a version of American domestic life preserved in amber. Time stopped in Springfield because we stopped it. We pressed pause in 1989 and we never pressed play. And here we are, 36 years later, with the same family in the same house in the same impossible town, watching, waiting, grateful that nothing changes. There is a version of this conversation about the floating timeline that goes in a different direction, one that is less about what we need from the show and more about what the show is saying about the nature of cultural memory itself. The Simpsons has existed long enough that it has become part of the way American culture remembers the past. Episodes from the early seasons are referenced as cultural touchstones. Quotes from the show function as shorthand for shared cultural experience. The show is not just entertainment that runs alongside American cultural history. It has become part of that history. It has become a way that Americans organize and reference their own experience of recent decades. And the floating timeline is what makes this possible. Because the show never commits to a specific historical moment, because it always treats its present as the audience's present, it has been available as a mirror to every successive generation of viewers. People who watched the show as children in the 1990s and people watching it now for the first time have both found the show addressing their specific present. The show has been everyone's contemporary, simultaneously, which is something only possible through the mechanism of the floating timeline. This has an interesting implication for what the show actually is. The Simpsons is not a record of a specific period in American cultural history. It is a mechanism for continuously processing American culture, whatever that culture is at the moment of viewing. It is less like a novel, with a fixed period and a fixed perspective, and more like a mirror that reflects whoever is standing in front of it. And because it has been reflecting American culture for 36 years, it has become part of the culture it reflects. It has influenced what it documents and been influenced by what it depicts. The boundary between the show and the thing the show is about has blurred to the point where separating them is more philosophical than practical. Springfield is a contamination zone, and the contamination has spread beyond the dome. It reached us a long time ago. We carry it in the phrases we use, and the cultural references we make, and the specific way we understand certain American situations. Springfield is not separate from America. Springfield is the story America tells itself about America. And we keep telling it, week after week, because we have not yet found a better one. The loop continues. The family is on the couch. The show will be there when you come back. It always is. Number, closing. We have been in Springfield for a long time tonight. Let your breathing settle now into something very slow. Let your body go fully heavy. Let the stories sit in whatever part of your mind receives them, without needing to hold on to them carefully or organize them into anything. Just let them rest there, quiet, alongside everything else you carry when you sleep. We trace the contamination from the cooling towers through the water and into the bodies of everyone who has ever lived in this town. We sat beside Homer in a hospital room in April 1993 and considered the possibility that everything after that date has been his dream. The long, patient, beautiful dream of a man who cannot wake up and will not let his family go. We reopened the Burns shooting and found the official answer less certain than the closed case file suggests. We followed Burns's impossible lifespan through weekly radiation treatments and a fortune built across a century specifically to ensure that he does not die. We watched Springfield vote, openly and unanimously, to exile the truth and make honesty illegal and expel the last person telling it. We looked behind Maggie's pacifier and found something extraordinary and patient and still waiting for the right moment. We counted the predictions and found the explanation both simpler and more interesting than the supernatural reading the internet prefers. We followed Mona Simpson through 27 years of exile and found a conspiracy running 3 generations deep. We searched for Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere, floating between jurisdictions and belonging to no state and therefore to everyone. We looked at the floating timeline until we understood that it is not a production convenience, but a statement about what we need from this show and what we have always needed from it. Every theory arrived at the same place through a different path. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something structural. Something that goes deeper than art style or narrative convention. Whether the cause is radiation or dreams or collective denial or engineered biology or the weight of 36 years without being permitted to change, something has broken the normal rules in this town, and the show has been telling you about it since the first episode, not through announcements, through accumulation, through the slow, patient layering of detail on detail across 800 episodes until the picture is simply there, waiting for anyone who looks carefully enough. The Simpsons is not hiding its mysteries. It is showing them every week. It is just that nobody in Springfield can see them, because Springfield will not let them. And nobody in the audience sees them either, for a long time, because we have been watching long enough to have become Springfield ourselves. We have accepted the yellow skin and the four fingers, and the ageless children and the billionaire who will not die, and the town that will not change. We have normalized it completely. But the theories exist because some people looked at Springfield and refused to accept the surface. They dug into it. They connected the pieces. They asked the questions the characters cannot ask because the characters are inside the loop. And what they found, underneath the comedy and the satire and 36 seasons of Homer finding his way home, is a version of Springfield that is stranger and sadder and more beautiful than the one presented at face value. A version where Homer's failures are scars left by a system that broke his family before he was old enough to understand what was happening. Where Maggie's silence is the most intelligent decision anyone in the household has made. Where Burns's continued existence is the logical consequence of what unlimited wealth looks like when it spends a century in service of one goal. Where Marge's patience is the structural foundation that holds the whole impossible arrangement standing. Where Bart's rebellion is the only reasonable response to a world that stopped making sense before he was born. Where Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and persistently, stubbornly hopeful, keeps asking questions that nobody around her wants answered, because she is the only person in Springfield who has not stopped looking. That is The Simpsons. 36 seasons, 800 episodes, the longest-running animated series in American history. And after all the analysis and all the theories and all the hours spent trying to understand what the show is actually doing underneath what it appears to be doing, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can we not let them go? Maybe because they are us in some way that is difficult to articulate but immediately recognizable. Homer is the person who tries imperfectly and loves completely and gets in his own way and keeps getting up every time. Marge is the one who holds things together without ever announcing that she is doing so. Bart is who we wanted to be at 10, before we understood the consequences of that wanting. Lisa is who we think we should have been. And Maggie is the part of ourselves we keep hidden, the quiet and capable and watching part, the part that observes everything and reveals nothing and waits behind its own kind of pacifier for the moment when it will finally be safe to speak. Or maybe it is simpler than all of that. Maybe we cannot let them go, because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that the world is different, that we are older, that the couch where we first watched this family stumble across the screen is somewhere else now, or gone, that the person who sat on that couch is someone shaped by 36 years of experience that Homer Simpson has not had to absorb, because Homer Simpson does not experience time the way we do. As long as the Simpsons are running, as long as the loop is floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is coming home at 5:30 from the plant, we do not have to admit any of that. We can sit down, we can turn on the television, we can go to Evergreen Terrace. The loop will be there when you wake up. It always is. That is the whole point. Homer will be there, right where we left him, stumbling towards something warm. Sleep well. Number. Extended passage. The town that made everything normal. There is a specific kind of cultural normalization that happens to things that are simply always there. Things that have been present since before your memory begins. Things that you grew up alongside without ever being introduced to them. Things that never had a moment of arrival because they were already established before you arrived. These things do not feel strange because they never felt strange. They feel like the furniture of the world. Background. Given. The Springfield nuclear power plant is this kind of thing for the residents of Springfield, and it has been this kind of thing for the viewers of The Simpsons since the show's first season. The cooling towers on the horizon, the occasional reference to safety concerns, Homer going to work, these things were established before most of the audience formed opinions about them, and they have remained constant across 36 years of episodes that have changed many other things. The plant is permanent. The plant is furniture. The plant is the way things are. This is precisely how Burns wants it. The most effective concealment is not secrecy. Secrecy draws attention. People want to know what you are hiding. The most effective concealment is normalization. Make the thing you are hiding so ordinary, so consistently present, so thoroughly a part of the expected landscape of daily life, that nobody thinks to question it. Not because they cannot see it, but because seeing it does not trigger the recognition that it is something to be concerned about. It has always been there. It will always be there. It is just part of Springfield. The show has been normalizing this building for 36 years. To its audience, which now spans multiple generations, the Springfield nuclear power plant is as unremarkable as the church or the school or the quick E-Mart. It is part of the vocabulary of the setting. Neutral, expected, simply there. And this normalization is itself part of what the theory is documenting. The show has been demonstrating, across its entire run, how a dangerous facility becomes invisible to a population through the simple mechanism of being continuously present. We have watched this happen. We have participated in it. We have accepted the plant as setting rather than subject for the same reasons the residents of Springfield have. Because it has always been there, because challenging it would be disruptive, because the story has not asked us to question it. The show has trained us as an audience to accept the plant the way the contamination has trained the residents of Springfield to accept it. The theory is not just about Springfield. It is about us. It is asking whether we, as the audience, are doing to the plant what the residents are doing to the contamination, normalizing it, treating it as furniture, seeing it without seeing it. The answer is probably yes. And the show has been making this point quietly for 36 years. In every episode where the plant's cooling towers appear on the horizon in the background of a scene and nobody on screen looks at them. Number, extended, passage, the Bart problem. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. He is the most famous 10-year-old in the history of American television, and he has been famous for longer than most of the people who find him funny have been alive. When the show began, Bart was a specific kind of child, the classic underachiever, the class clown, the kid who refuses to conform to the expectations that the school and the family place on him. He was irreverent at a time when irreverence felt new and slightly transgressive on television. He pushed back against authority with a confidence that a generation of actual 10-year-olds found aspirational. He was cool in the way that rebellious children are cool to other children who are not allowed to be rebellious. He was the kid you wanted to be. And then the years passed, and Bart stayed 10, and the relationship between the character and the audience became something more complicated. The kids who idolized Bart in 1990 are now in their 40s. They have aged through adolescence and young adulthood and into a version of their lives that Bart will never experience. They have become people that Bart, frozen at 10, could not recognize, and yet they still watch him. And they find, if they are honest about it, that they still understand him. This is the real power of the floating timeline as applied specifically to Bart. He is not just frozen at 10 because the show cannot figure out how to let him grow. He is frozen at 10 because 10 is the age at which the specific quality of his rebellion makes sense. 10 is old enough to understand that authority is not always right and young enough to act on that understanding without the weight of consequences that would come later. 10 is the age of genuine anarchic freedom, the last moment before the systems of obligation and responsibility begin to close in. Bart's irreverence is age-specific. It would mean something different at 20. It would mean something different at 30. At 10, it means exactly what it means in the show. And the audience, regardless of their actual age, experiences Bart's 10-year-old perspective as something they can still access. Not because they are still 10, but because the show has been providing continuous access to that specific emotional register for 36 years. Bart has been their ambassador to 10. He has maintained the connection to that age even as the viewers themselves moved far past it. He is the part of the audience that stayed behind, the part that refused to grow up, the part that still finds the principal ridiculous and the homework pointless and the constraints of the classroom intolerable. Under the coma theory, Bart's permanent 10ness is the most emotionally charged element of the dream. Homer's dreaming mind cannot imagine Bart growing up because Homer has not been there to witness it. The dream can only show Homer the Bart that existed when Homer last saw him. 10 years old, aggravating, loud, deeply and completely loved. Every episode where Homer and Bart connect, where the difficulty between them softens into something recognizably affectionate, is Homer's unconscious mind giving itself what it most needs. Not space travel. Not secret societies. This specific boy at this specific age, in this specific relationship. Under the radiation theory, Bart's cognitive profile is its own kind of documentation. The show has established across many episodes that Bart is not merely poorly educated or academically disinclined. His specific patterns of impulsive behavior, his difficulty with delayed gratification, his susceptibility to in-the-moment decisions that he knows intellectually are bad ideas but cannot resist executing, these are the behavioral signatures of frontal lobe development that has been compromised in specific ways. Not stupidity, impaired executive function, a brain that processes immediate reward and consequence effectively, but struggles with the longer-range planning that would allow him to choose differently. This is consistent with what we know the contamination does to neurological development in children who grow up inside it. Bart is not just a troublemaking kid. He is a kid whose brain developed inside a contamination zone, and his specific behavioral profile reflects what that environment did to his developing frontal cortex. Number. Extended passage. The Lisa problem. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and she is the conscience of the show. This has been her function since the earliest seasons, to articulate the ethical and intellectual dimensions of whatever the show is examining, to ask the questions that should be asked, to hold the position that should be held even when holding it costs her socially and emotionally within the world of Springfield. She is also, from the perspective of the various theories we have examined tonight, the character who makes the least sense. The radiation theory predicts cognitive impairment as the primary biological consequence of the plant's contamination. And Lisa is not cognitively impaired. She is the opposite. She is the most intellectually capable character in her family, arguably one of the most intellectually capable characters in Springfield's universe. If the contamination is diminishing cognitive function across the board, why has it amplified rather than diminished Lisa's? One possible answer: the radiation affects each biological system differently depending on the specific mutation it produces. The same exposure that dramatically reduces Homer's cognitive capacity and produces Bart's impulsive behavioral profile has done something different to Lisa. Something that has amplified certain cognitive functions, while perhaps affecting others in ways the show has depicted differently. Lisa's extraordinary intelligence may be the same process that produced Homer's extraordinary stupidity, operating in a different biological context, producing a different result. Another possible answer: Lisa's intelligence is the contamination's most sophisticated joke. She can see exactly what is wrong with Springfield. She can articulate it with clarity and evidence and moral force. And she is entirely powerless to change any of it. The system does not respond to her intelligence. Her gifts are not rewarded. Her advocacy does not produce the changes she advocates for. She is the most capable person in Springfield in the most important ways, and Springfield uses none of it. It simply waits for her to exhaust herself and accept that this is how things are. This is what the contamination has done to Lisa: not taken her intelligence, given it to her, in a context where having it is a form of punishment. She can see everything clearly and do nothing about any of it. She is the town's built-in conscience, present and functional, and completely without influence. Burns could not have designed a more effective management of the threat that genuine intelligence represents. Give it to a child, place that child in a context where children have no power, and let the intelligence spend itself on advocacy that the town's structure ensures cannot produce change. Lisa keeps fighting anyway. This is what distinguishes her from every other character in Springfield. She knows the system is not going to reward her. She knows her intelligence is treated as inconvenience rather than asset. She knows that Springfield is not going to change because she asks it to. And she keeps asking. She keeps playing the saxophone. She keeps raising her hand. She keeps being the person who refuses to pretend that the things that are wrong are not wrong, even when that refusal costs her socially and emotionally and practically every time. Under the coma theory, Lisa's persistence is Homer's deepest hope for his second child. He cannot imagine her growing up. He cannot see who she becomes. But he can dream her as the person he needs her to be. Someone who will not stop fighting even when the fighting is expensive. Someone who will keep asking questions even when no one wants the answers. Someone who will be okay, not because the world makes it easy for her to be okay, but because she is the kind of person who insists on being okay regardless. That is what Homer's dreaming mind gives Lisa. Not success, not recognition, not the validation the real Lisa probably deserves. Something harder to provide and more necessary, the persistence to keep going. Number. Extended passage, the Burns system and its permanence. The most chilling aspect of the Springfield that emerges from these theories is not any individual mystery. It is the comprehensive stability of the system that produces all of them. The plant leaks, the population is impaired, the town denies, Burns survives, the family stays frozen, and every week the loop resets, and the same conditions obtain, and the process begins again. There is no apparent mechanism within the show's universe by which this system could be disrupted from inside. The contamination has already impaired the cognitive function of the people who might challenge it. The collective denial has rendered the evidence of the contamination socially invisible. Burns's control of the economy makes economic resistance impossible without catastrophic personal cost. The floating timeline ensures that nobody accumulates enough consecutive awareness of the problem to build sustained momentum against it. The system is self-reinforcing at every level. This is what makes Springfield not just a quirky fictional town, but a genuine and carefully constructed portrait of how institutional harm persists. The system that causes harm organizes itself so that the harm cannot be addressed from within. The people most affected by the harm are the ones least equipped to challenge the system causing it, because the harm has specifically targeted the capacities that would be required for the challenge. The institution that causes the most damage is also the one that provides the most essential service, making opposition to the institution practically indistinguishable from opposition to your own livelihood and your community's survival. The documentation of the harm is normalized out of relevance by being constantly present. Burns did not design this system from scratch. He inherited elements of it and refined others and exploited the dynamics that emerged naturally from the arrangement between a powerful institution and a dependent community. But he understood what he was inheriting and what he was building, and he has been an active participant in maintaining its stability for over a century. The system works not because Burns is a genius, but because he has had a very long time to observe what threatens it and to address those threats before they become serious. The contamination is one such address. The employment arrangement is another. The grandpa deal is another. The Mona pursuit is another. Each of them serves the same fundamental goal: keep the population dependent, keep the opposition impaired, keep the system running, keep Burns at the top. The individual cruelties are not the point. They are the tools of a project whose real purpose is stability. Burns is not cruel because he enjoys cruelty. He is cruel because cruelty, strategically applied, produces the conditions he needs to continue operating. Springfield will not escape this by itself. The resources and the cognitive capacity and the institutional independence required for escape are not available inside the town. The dome scenario in the movie, for all its horror, is actually the first real possibility the show has ever introduced of external intervention capable of disrupting the system. But the movie also showed that even external intervention, even the federal government recognizing and responding to the scope of the problem, is not sufficient. Burns's influence extends outside Springfield. The systems he has built do not end at the town's borders. The system is too large and too embedded to be addressed from the outside by normal institutional means. And it is too self-reinforcing to be addressed from the inside by a population that has been shaped by it. Springfield is, in the fullest sense of the theory, a closed system, one that produces its own conditions of permanence, one that has been running for 36 years in the show and for much longer within the show's internal logic, and that shows no signs of stopping. The lights stay on, the family stays on the couch, the loop continues. Burns adjusts his treatment schedule and checks his calendar and prepares for another week in the town that cannot do without him and cannot hold him accountable for what doing without him has cost. Number. Extended passage. What Springfield means. Step back from the individual theories for a moment. Step back from the radiation and the coma and the shooting and the immortality and all the specific evidence we have examined across this long night. Step back to the largest possible view and ask what the show, taken as a whole across 36 seasons and 800 episodes, is actually saying. The Simpsons is the longest-running animated series in American history. It is the longest-running scripted primetime show in the history of American television. It has been part of the cultural fabric of the United States for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. It has been watched by more Americans, in more contexts, across more generations, than almost any other piece of media ever produced. And what it has been saying, consistently and without interruption across all of that time, is this: the system is broken, and the people inside it cannot fix it because the system has made sure they cannot. Not in those words, not in a speech or a plot arc or a dramatic conclusion, in the accumulation. In the three-eyed fish and the floating timeline and the reset and the collective denial and the billionaire who never dies and the family that never ages and the town that never changes, in the patient, consistent, inexhaustible documentation of a community that is simultaneously aware of its own problems and incapable of addressing them, because the problems are too large and the tools available are too compromised and the system too complete. This is satire in its purest and most enduring form. Not the kind that identifies a specific absurdity and mocks it until the absurdity changes. The kind that names a structural condition and holds that name up to the light year after year until the naming itself becomes the statement. Springfield is not a prediction of where America was going. It is a description of where America already was. The show just wrote it down, and it has been writing it down, continuously and faithfully, for 36 years. The mysteries are real. The theories are real, in the sense that they are internally consistent responses to things the show has actually established and actually depicts. But the mystery underneath all the mysteries is the same one it has always been. How does a system of harm this comprehensive, this self-sustaining, this thoroughly embedded in the daily life of a community, continue indefinitely? The answer the show has been providing week after week is because we let it, because we tune in, because we find it charming, because we have accepted the yellow skin and the four fingers and the glowing employer and the family that never grows up and the town that never changes as simply the way things are around here. Because we have been watching long enough to have become Springfield. And Springfield, as we have seen, does not change. The theories exist because some people refuse to accept that, refuse to watch the show at the surface level, refuse to let the normalization work on them, refuse to see the plant as furniture and the contamination as background. They looked at Springfield carefully, and what they found was not lazy writing or cartoon logic. They found a portrait of institutional harm so complete and so carefully maintained that it has been running, unremarked and unremarkable, for 36 years straight in one of the most watched shows in American television history. And it will keep running. Because the system that maintains it, whether it is the radiation, or the denial, or the coma, or the Burns immortality, or all four simultaneously, is more durable than any individual challenge to it. Homer will come home tonight. The family will be on the couch. Springfield will be right where we left it. It always is. The whole point is that it always is. Number, deep expansion. The nuclear heart of Springfield. Continued. There is a specific episode that deserves more sustained attention than it usually receives when the radiation theory is discussed, and that episode is Marge versus the Monorail from Season 4. On its surface, the episode is a parody of The Music Man, a comedy about a con man who sells Springfield a defective monorail. But what it establishes along the way is a detailed portrait of how Springfield makes collective decisions about infrastructure and risk. The episode begins with Burns being caught dumping nuclear waste in a park. He is fined $3 million by federal authorities. This is one of the few times the show depicts a successful regulatory action against Burns. He is caught. He is fined. The fine is substantial. This is the moment the theory asks you to sit with. Burns was caught dumping nuclear waste in a park, and the regulatory fine was $3 million. The fine was paid, and Burns continued operating. The fine for illegal nuclear waste dumping in a public space is, apparently, $3 million. Burns's fortune is measured in hundreds of millions to billions. $3 million is not a deterrent, it is a licensing fee. It is the cost of doing business in the way Burns chooses to do business, and it is a cost so trivially small relative to his resources that it does not produce behavioral change. He dumped nuclear waste, he was fined, he will dump nuclear waste again, because the fine is cheaper than compliance. The regulatory system that is supposed to prevent Burns from poisoning Springfield has, in this episode, demonstrated precisely why it does not work. The penalty is not large enough to matter. The inspection regime is not thorough enough to catch most of what Burns does. The enforcement mechanism is not powerful enough to produce the behavioral changes that would protect the community. The system exists, it functions, and it fails. Not through corruption or malice, though both of those are also present, but through simple disproportion between the scale of the violation and the scale of the consequence. Springfield's residents attend the town meeting in the wake of this revelation. They arrive knowing that their town's most powerful resident has been caught dumping nuclear waste in a public park. And within the episode's running time, they have been distracted by a musical number and have unanimously voted to spend the fine money on a monorail. The $3 million that could have funded systematic environmental remediation, or water quality testing, or medical monitoring of the population exposed to the plant's contamination, is going to a transportation project that will fail spectacularly, and that Springfield chose because it was presented in an entertaining way. The episode is one of the show's most beloved. It is quoted constantly. The monorail song is culturally permanent. And what it is actually documenting, underneath the comedy and the memorable music, is the mechanism by which a population that has received conclusive evidence of their contamination immediately loses track of the contamination in favor of something shinier and more entertaining. Springfield had $3 million of documented environmental harm money. It spent it on a monorail. This is not stupidity. This is what happens when a population's attention span and deliberative capacity have been compromised to the point where they cannot sustain focus on complex problems long enough to address them. The monorail was more immediate, more sensory, more emotionally accessible than environmental remediation. It was also less necessary, less impactful, and ultimately disastrous. But it was chosen because the cognitive tools required to make the other choice had been impaired by the same process that made the choice necessary. Burns watched this from his office. He paid his fine and adjusted his approach slightly and watched $3 million of liability turn into a community decision that had nothing to do with him. The system worked exactly as he needed it to work, not because he manipulated the meeting, because the contamination had already done the work of manipulation for him. Let us also examine what the show tells us about the specific biology of the contamination's effects, because the show is actually quite specific about this in ways that tend to go unnoticed. Homer's hair loss follows a pattern that is documented in radiation exposure. The specific regions of Homer's skull where hair is absent and hair is present map with surprising specificity onto patterns that appear in populations with significant long-term radiation exposure. This is typically read as a character design choice reflecting Homer's middle-aged American father status. But within the radiation theory, it is evidence of a biological process operating on a specific physiological system. Homer's teeth are also worth examining. His dental X-rays, shown in several episodes, reveal a jaw anatomy that does not correspond to normal human dental arrangements. This has been played as comedy and as evidence of Homer's general biological unusualness. Within the radiation theory, dental development is particularly sensitive to radiation exposure during childhood and adolescence, and the jaw and dental abnormalities visible in Homer's X-rays are consistent with radiation-affected development during his formative years. The physical bulk Homer carries, and the specific distribution of that bulk, has been studied by fans in considerable detail. The show depicts Homer as significantly overweight, but the distribution of his weight follows a pattern that is not entirely consistent with simple dietary excess. The specific regions where his weight accumulates and the specific regions where he maintains unusual physical capability, his striking physical strength when required for comedy in certain scenes, suggest a biological profile more complex than simple obesity. Within the radiation theory, radiation-induced metabolic changes can produce specific patterns of weight distribution and specific alterations in muscle function that do not follow the patterns of weight gain produced by simple caloric excess. None of these individual observations constitutes definitive evidence, but the accumulation, the consistent direction in which all of them point, the specificity of their alignment with known radiation effects, is what the theory is built on, not one smoking gun. 100 small observations, each individually explicable by other means, but collectively pointing in the same direction with the kind of consistency that cannot be fully attributed to coincidence. Burns knows. He has always known. The specific irony of his situation, the specific joke the theory makes about his character, is that he is personally the most complete documentation of the radiation's effects that exists in Springfield. His body is what several decades of intensive radiation exposure produces in a human system when that system has the resources to manage the exposure medically. His weekly treatments are not some arcane medical mystery. They are radiation management, calibrated over a century of practice by a man who has been the plant's closest observer for longer than the plant has existed in its current form. He knows what the radiation does because he has been watching what it does to himself for longer than most of the town's residents have been alive. and he manages his exposure carefully and precisely with the most sophisticated medical resources available. While the radiation continues accumulating in the population downstream, unmanaged, unmeasured, unaddressed. The man who best understands the effects of radiation in this environment is the man preventing any effort to address those effects in the surrounding community. Not through active intervention, not through specific actions to suppress research or silence advocates, though both of those may also be occurring. Simply by continuing to own and operate the plant in the way he has always owned and operated it. The contamination is not Burns's error, it is his policy. Number. Deep expansion. Homer's coma continued. The coma theory has a specific implication for the later seasons that most discussions of the theory do not examine directly, and it involves the progressive deterioration of the dream's internal logic. In the early post-coma seasons, the dream is still largely coherent. The scenarios have become more surreal than the pre-coma episodes, but they retain a recognizable structure. The plots build to conclusions that feel emotionally earned. The character dynamics remain consistent with the characters' established personalities. Homer's relationship with Marge in the post-coma seasons still carries genuine emotional weight. His relationships with the children are still textured and recognizable. As the later seasons progress, these qualities begin to erode, not in a single moment but through gradual accumulation. The scenarios become more disconnected from each other. The emotional stakes of individual episodes feel less grounded in the characters' established inner lives and more like excuses for set pieces. The celebrity appearances multiply. The show within a show references and self-referential humor increase. The internal logic that governs any individual episode's events becomes less rigorous. If the coma theory is correct, this is exactly what you would expect. Homer's brain is not static. A brain in a prolonged coma does not maintain constant function. It deteriorates, gradually, as the biological systems that support it are stressed by the duration of unconsciousness. The dream becomes less coherent as the brain generating it becomes less capable of maintaining coherence. The plots grow stranger because the dreaming mind's capacity for narrative structure is diminishing. The emotional connections feel less grounded because the neurological systems that produce emotional texture in the dream are losing resolution. The decline of the show's quality in the later seasons, which is one of the most extensively discussed phenomena in television criticism, corresponds precisely to what the theory predicts for a brain in long-term coma deterioration. The dream does not end, but it begins to lose its shape. It begins to produce images and scenarios that feel disconnected from each other because the connective tissue of the dreaming mind is becoming less capable of maintaining connections. The fans who loved the early seasons and have struggled with the later ones are, under the coma theory, experiencing something specific. They are watching Homer's mind fail in real time. They are watching the beautiful, coherent dream of April 1993 slowly degrade into something more fragmented and less structured as the years accumulate, and the brain generating it loses capacity. The grief they feel about the show's quality is the grief of watching something you love deteriorate. And what they love, specifically, is the version of Homer's mind that was capable of dreaming this particular family with this particular texture. The early dream was so detailed, so emotionally precise, so specifically textured with the specific quality of this family's love and dysfunction, that it felt real. The later dream is still the same characters, in the same house, in the same town, but it has lost something. The precision, the specific texture, the quality that made it feel like something real rather than something generated. Homer's brain is still trying. Across 32 years of unconsciousness, his mind is still dreaming his family, still placing them in the house on Evergreen Terrace, still having them come through whatever each episode throws at them, still getting them back to the couch. The devotion is unchanged. The capacity is diminishing. And the audience mourns this without quite knowing what they are mourning, because most of them do not know the theory. They just know that something about the show feels different now, that the dream is thinner than it used to be, that Homer's mind is not quite holding things together the way it once did. The show will not tell you this, but it will keep showing it. Week by week, year by year, the dream continues. Somewhat diminished, still running, still refusing to end, because the person dreaming it is still in that bed in Springfield General, and the dream is still keeping him company, and the family is still there, still on the couch, still waiting for him to find his way home. Number deep expansion. Maggie Simpson. Continued. There is an episode that receives almost no attention in discussions of Maggie's intelligence, and it is one of the most revealing pieces of evidence in the entire Maggie theory. It aired in Season 3, and it is called Homer Alone. The premise is that Marge, overwhelmed by the demands of her life, has a breakdown on a bridge and refuses to move until she receives some form of help and recognition. She is hospitalized briefly, and during her absence the care of Maggie falls to Homer. Homer is, as established, not a sophisticated caregiver under the best of circumstances. His management of Maggie during Marge's absence devolves into a series of failures that ultimately result in Maggie going missing. Homer cannot find her. A search is initiated. Marge is called back from her rest, and Maggie is eventually found at the home of the Flanderses next door, where she has apparently gone of her own accord and made herself comfortable. The 1-year-old crossed the street, independently, found a specific address, arrived at the door, made entry in some way that the episode does not fully depict, and installed herself in a safe environment until her situation was resolved. The show handles this as comedy and does not linger on its implications, but process what it requires. Maggie assessed her situation and determined that she was not being adequately cared for. She identified an alternative source of care. She knew where that alternative was located in geographic space. She understood that getting herself there independently was preferable to waiting for circumstances to improve in her current situation. She executed the plan without assistance. She succeeded. This is problem recognition, strategic planning, goal formation, environmental navigation, and successful execution by a 1-year-old in a single episode, handled as a punchline. The show will occasionally have Maggie do something extraordinary and then have the adults interpret it as accident or coincidence. Maggie fires a gun, and it is an accident because nobody suspects infants of intentional action. Maggie navigates a city independently, and it is played as a funny thing she did. The adults around her have a cognitive framework that categorizes infant behavior as random and reflexive, and they apply that framework to Maggie's behavior regardless of how much evidence she provides that her behavior is neither random nor reflexive. This is actually a precise satire of how the people in a child's life project their assumptions about child capacity onto specific children and miss what is actually happening. Adults see what they expect to see. They have a category for infant behavior and they apply it consistently, which means that an infant operating far outside the categorical norms goes undetected because the detection mechanism is calibrated to the category rather than the individual. Maggie has understood this from the beginning. She did not create the adult's cognitive limitations. She simply identified them and organized her behavior around them. There is also the question of what Maggie has been doing with 36 years of observation that nobody around her has registered as observation. She has watched every significant interaction in this family across 3 decades. She has been present for conversations that the adults had without understanding that she was following them. She has witnessed arguments, reconciliations, decisions, revelations, deals, and emotional moments of every variety. All of it has gone into the archive. None of it has been visible on the outside. She knows where the bodies are buried, in the figurative sense. She knows things about her parents and her siblings and their neighbors and their community that none of those people know she knows. She knows where the real power in the family lies and where it wobbles. She knows which of Homer's commitments are real and which are performances. She knows which of Marge's reassurances are genuine and which are hopeful self-deception. She knows exactly what Bart is capable of and exactly what he is actually choosing to do, which are 2 very different things. She knows what Lisa is afraid of, which is a deeper and more personal knowledge than what Lisa is advocating for publicly. This is a specific kind of knowledge. The knowledge of someone who has been in the room for a very long time and has been paying attention the whole time without anyone accounting for their attention. The knowledge of the person in the family who everyone treats as the background, because the background does not speak, and so the background sees everything. When Maggie finally does something with all of this, if the show ever allows her to, the leverage she holds will be extraordinary. Not the leverage of threat or exposure, the leverage of complete understanding. She knows this family better than it knows itself. She has watched it for 36 years with full cognitive capacity, and without the self-protective distortions that come from being a recognized participant in the family's dynamics. She sees Homer without Homer's defenses. She sees Marge without Marge's self-presentation. She sees all of them as they actually are rather than as they need to be seen. That knowledge is a form of power. It has always been a form of power. She has simply not yet found the moment when it is safe to use it. Number. Deep expansion. The predictions continued. The relationship between The Simpsons and American political reality is worth examining in more detail than the Trump example usually receives, because the show's track record on political prediction is actually more nuanced and more interesting than the highlight reel suggests. The show has consistently depicted a specific model of American political dysfunction. The model includes local government that is easily corrupted because the people responsible for corruption also depend on each other socially and economically. A wealthy class that uses institutional mechanisms rather than direct force to maintain its advantages. A middle class that participates in its own exploitation by choosing comfort over accountability. A political process that functions as theater for the benefit of the governed rather than as a genuine mechanism for expressing or enacting the governed's preferences. And a media environment that amplifies the theatrical dimension and obscures the functional dimension. This is not a prediction. It is a description. The show is describing the American political system as it existed in 1989 and continues to exist today. What looks like prediction is the show noting that these dynamics, once established, tend to produce specific outcomes when specific conditions are met. The conditions that produced Trump were already present and documented in Springfield. The show depicted the outcome because it understood the conditions. A Trump-shaped outcome was predictable from the conditions, not from any special knowledge about Trump specifically. The more interesting predictive claims are the ones where the show was not just identifying inevitable outcomes from established conditions, but was genuinely ahead of the cultural conversation about those conditions. The show's depictions of surveillance culture, of the normalization of monitoring and data collection in daily life, appeared years before most Americans were engaging with these concepts as public topics. The show depicted characters accepting and even inviting surveillance into their homes before this was a live cultural conversation. It explored the privacy implications of commercial data collection before the commercial data collection was widespread enough to have obvious privacy implications. This is the kind of prediction that is harder to attribute to trend extrapolation or careful analysis of existing conditions. It requires anticipating not just where a trend is going, but how the public relationship to that trend will develop. The show's writers, who had backgrounds in mathematics and computer science and social science, may have had access to enough technical knowledge to see where the trajectory of personal technology was going before the public conversation caught up with the technology's actual development. The show also has a significant track record of predicting its own cultural future, which is perhaps less commented on because it is less dramatic but is in some ways more impressive. The Simpsons has predicted the kinds of cultural phenomena that would become significant, the forms that popular culture would take before those forms existed. Its early episodes engaged with the format of reality television years before reality television became dominant. Its depictions of celebrity culture anticipated the specific texture of celebrity culture that emerged in the 2000s. Its engagement with the internet happened early and in ways that anticipated specific features of internet culture before those features were well established. This is because the show has always had an unusual relationship with its own cultural context. It is simultaneously a product of American popular culture and a commentary on it, which means it has always been in the position of describing the thing it is part of. And describing something carefully enough, for long enough, produces a kind of intimacy with its trajectory that can look from outside like prediction. The show knows American culture extremely well. It has been studying it for 36 years. The apparent predictions are the show doing what the show has always done, paying very close attention to the thing it is about, and occasionally being close enough to that thing to see where it is going before the rest of the audience does. Number. Deep expansion. Where is Springfield continued? The geographic impossibility of Springfield has produced one of the most sustained fan projects in the history of television analysis, the attempt to definitively locate the town using the show's own established evidence. This project has been ongoing since the early days of the internet, and it is a remarkable document of human persistence in the face of deliberately constructed impossibility. The evidence has been assembled across hundreds of episodes. Springfield is 3 hours from Capital City by car, which places it within a specific radius of wherever Capital City is. Springfield has a harbor, which eliminates inland states unless Capital City is coastal. Springfield experiences all 4 seasons, which eliminates the most extreme climates. Springfield can access a desert within reasonable driving distance, which is inconsistent with most northeastern states. Springfield's hills and mountains are visible from town, but the scale of the mountains visible varies significantly between episodes, suggesting either different mountain ranges or the show's artists working from different references. Various fans have constructed maps placing Springfield in specific locations: Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Illinois, Nebraska, Oregon, Idaho. Each mapping is internally consistent with some episodes and inconsistent with others. The fan project of locating Springfield is also, always, a project of deciding which evidence to trust and which to discount, which episodes are canonical and which are anomalous, which details are meaningful and which are just the art department not checking its geography. The project is beautiful in its futility and in what it reveals about the kind of attention that devoted fans bring to a show they love. These are people who know the show in extraordinary detail, who have cataloged its geographic evidence with an archival thoroughness that most actual archives would envy. And what all of that work has produced is the same conclusion: Springfield cannot be pinned down. Not because the evidence is insufficient, but because the evidence is deliberately constructed to prevent pinning. The fans keep looking because looking is its own reward. The process of attending closely to Springfield, of cataloging its details, of trying to understand how all the pieces fit together, is pleasurable even when it does not produce the answer it is looking for. This is what the best long-running shows create: a relationship with the viewer that makes engagement with the material intrinsically satisfying, independent of whether the engagement resolves into definitive answers. Springfield is not the destination. The attention you bring to Springfield is the destination. The town refuses to be found so that the looking never has to stop. And in this way, Springfield's geographic impossibility is not a failure of world-building or a consequence of production inconsistency. It is the most successful piece of world-building in the history of American animated television, because it produced something that most fictional worlds do not produce: a reason to keep looking forever, with the guarantee that the looking will always find something interesting without ever finding something final. Number. Deep expansion. The floating timeline continued. The floating timeline creates a specific problem for the show's relationship with its own history that most analyses of it do not fully engage with. It makes the show's past unstable. If the timeline floats, then references to past events in recent episodes are references to events that may have occurred in a different decade than they appear to have occurred in, which makes the chronology of the show's internal history essentially unmappable. When a recent episode references Homer and Marge's high school courtship, it is referencing an event that the show has depicted as occurring in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, and the 2000s, depending on which episode you are watching. The event happened. When it happened is variable. How old the Simpsons were when it happened is variable. The emotional content and the relationship dynamics are consistent. The temporal and cultural context shifts with each revision. This means that the show's past is not a fixed history but a living revision. It is not that the show made mistakes about when things happened and is correcting them. The show is actively rewriting its own past to maintain the fiction of the permanent present. The past is revised in real time to remain compatible with the floating now. There is something philosophically interesting in this. Most narratives treat the past as fixed and the future as open. The past is what happened. It is recorded. It is the stable foundation from which the present extends. The Simpsons inverts this. Its future is stable. Springfield will always look like Springfield. The family will always be the family. The loop will continue. Its past is unstable. When things happened, in what cultural context, against what historical backdrop, these shift to accommodate the present's requirements. The permanent element is the now, and the past is rewritten continuously to support the now. This is actually a precise model of how memory works under certain conditions. The research on memory has established that memories are not static recordings. They are reconstructed each time they are accessed, and the reconstruction is influenced by the current state of the person doing the remembering. What we remember about the past changes as we change. Our memories of past events are consistently revised to be compatible with who we are now and what we need the past to have been. We are all running floating timelines on our own histories. The Simpsons, by depicting this explicitly through its timeline structure, is not just a convenience of animation. It is a mirror of how human memory actually functions. The past is not what happened. The past is what we need it to have been, revised continuously, held in a present that floats on top of a history we are constantly rewriting. Homer's past is different in every telling, because Homer's past is his memory, and his memory is subject to the same dynamics that affect all memory. The specific details shift. The emotional core remains. He remembers loving Marge. He remembers his children being young. He remembers being part of this family. The when and the how of all of that are less stable, more revisable, subject to the needs of the current moment. This makes the coma theory even more interesting, because a dreaming mind's relationship with its own past would be subject to exactly these dynamics at maximum intensity. Homer's dream of his family includes memories of his family, and those memories are being generated by a dreaming brain that cannot check them against external reality. They are pure reconstruction. And so the past of the dream is even more unstable than the past of waking life, because the external anchors that help hold waking memories in place are not available to the dreaming mind. Springfield's past keeps shifting because the mind that is dreaming Springfield can only generate the past from available memory traces. And memory traces are not stable. They shift, they revise. They become what they need to be. And so Homer and Marge were teenagers in the 1970s, and then in the 1990s, and then in the 2000s, because Homer's brain keeps revising when they were teenagers to fit whatever else the dream requires at the moment of generation. The floating timeline is not a flaw in the show's construction. It is the most accurate possible depiction of what a very long dream, generated by an impaired and slowly deteriorating brain, would actually look like. The past that keeps shifting, the present that stays the same, the family that never ages because the mind doing the dreaming cannot update the reference images it has for them. All of it is internally consistent with the theory, in a way that makes the theory not just emotionally compelling, but structurally precise. The dream runs, the family stays frozen, the past keeps revising. And Homer's brain, still working from whatever remains of its function, keeps the couch lit and the family home and the front door unlocked for the version of himself that is never going to walk through it from the outside. Number. Extended passage, the neighbors of Evergreen Terrace. The theories we have examined tonight focus primarily on the Simpson family because the family is the show's center of gravity. But the radiation theory, the coma theory, the collective denial theory, all of them make predictions about the supporting cast of Springfield that are worth examining on their own terms. Ned Flanders is Homer's next-door neighbor. He is, in the show's universe, the most overtly religious character in a town that has a church and a congregation and a relationship with faith that the show examines repeatedly. Ned is kind. He is patient. He is forgiving to an extent that other characters, Homer most vocally among them, find aggravating and slightly suspicious. His forgiveness extends to people who actively wrong him, including Homer, whose relentless borrowing and occasional deliberate cruelty Ned absorbs without permanent resentment. The show has established Ned's background in a remarkable episode that recontextualizes his patience and his faith entirely. In Season 8, Hurricane Nettie revealed that Ned as a child was a genuinely out-of-control problem child, a kid whose behavior was so disruptive that his parents brought him to a psychiatrist for an experimental treatment. The treatment involved 8 months of psychological conditioning designed to completely suppress his aggression. The conditioning worked too well. It suppressed not just the aggression, but all negative emotion. Ned's extraordinary patience and forgiveness are not natural personality traits. They are the residue of psychological conditioning so thorough that it eliminated his capacity to experience or express negative emotion in normal ways. His faith is the pressure valve. The only outlet available to someone who cannot express anger or resentment or frustration in direct interpersonal ways is to route those emotions through a theological framework that transforms them into something acceptable. When Ned's house is destroyed in a hurricane and he watches his neighbors build him a new one badly, and Homer received the credit for organizing the effort, Ned finally cracks. He screams at the assembled crowd. He calls them out for every specific way they have failed him across his life in Springfield. He is hospitalized afterward because the breakthrough was experienced as a psychiatric crisis. The interesting dimension for the radiation theory. Ned's conditioning occurred in 1960 approximately, which is roughly when the plant would have been in its early operational phase. The extreme intervention his parents sought was produced by a specific behavioral profile in young Ned that the theory would describe as radiation-affected childhood development. His parents did not recognize what was producing the behavior. They sought help from a psychiatrist who had a specific experimental treatment available. The treatment suppressed the symptom by eliminating the behavioral expression, but the underlying neurological condition that the radiation had produced remained. Ned's extraordinary religious faith, his impossible patience, his suppressed emotional life, are all downstream of a combination of the radiation's effects on his childhood development and the conditioning treatment that his parents chose in response to those effects. He is, in the theory's reading, the most dramatically visible example of the way the contamination combines with individual responses to its effects to produce outcomes that look like personality traits rather than environmental consequences. The Flanderses are also worth noting as a data point on the aging issue. Ned's sons, Rod and Todd, have been young children for the same 36 years that Bart and Lisa have been 10 and 8. They are perpetually present in a state of early childhood that, like all perpetual states in Springfield, is impossible under any biological framework. They are the children of a man who has been significantly altered by both the contamination and by his own specific psychological history. Whatever the radiation did to Ned, combined with the conditioning's effects on his neurology and his emotional architecture, the children who resulted from this specific biological context are Rod and Todd as the show depicts them. And Rod and Todd are not typical children even by Springfield standards. Their emotional lives are visibly organized around their father's psychological architecture. They are sweet, slightly anxious, thoroughly compliant, oriented toward pleasing authority and toward their faith in a way that reads as learned rather than spontaneous. They are miniature versions of the post-conditioning Ned, carrying forward the emotional profile he was given by his treatment into their own developmental trajectories. The radiation theory, combined with the conditioning episode, produces a picture of Ned's household as a site where the contamination's effects have been compounded by human intervention. The biological alteration, combined with a psychological intervention that attempted to address the biological alteration's behavioral symptoms, and the result is Ned Flanders, simultaneously the nicest person in Springfield and one of its most quietly troubled, living next door to the family whose patriarch caused the plant's negligence to continue for another several decades. Chief Clancy Wiggum is worth examining through the radiation theory's lens because his specific cognitive profile is distinctive and consistent across many episodes. Wiggum is not merely lazy or incompetent or corrupt, though he is all of these things. His specific failures of cognition follow a pattern that is different from Homer's. Homer fails at tasks requiring sustained attention and executive function. Wiggum fails at tasks requiring the kind of associative reasoning that allows a person to connect information from different sources and derive coherent conclusions. He has information available to him that, if connected properly, would allow him to do his job. He consistently fails to make those connections. He receives clues and does not follow them. He observes evidence and does not recognize it as such. This specific profile, the failure to connect available information into coherent conclusions while maintaining adequate function in other domains, is consistent with damage to specific associative processing pathways in the brain. The radiation theory would predict exactly this kind of variability in cognitive impairment across the population, with different individuals' neurology affected differently depending on their specific biological context and their specific exposure history. Wiggum's ineffectiveness as a law enforcement officer has protected Burns from official scrutiny for decades. This is not an accident of casting. It is the consequence of a specific neurological impairment, operating in the specific role where that impairment produces maximum benefit for the man who benefits from law enforcement ineffectiveness. Springfield's police chief has the specific cognitive profile that makes him constitutionally incapable of following the chain of evidence that would lead to the plant's management. Mayor Quimby completes the picture. Quimby is venal, openly corrupt, personally dishonest, and enthusiastically self-serving. But he is also not simply evil. He is a product of a specific political environment, the environment that a contaminated town with a dependent population and a powerful single employer produces. Quimby governs a town where the most powerful resident is also the most dangerous, where the most dangerous resident funds political campaigns and controls economic conditions, and where the population cannot sustain focus on accountability long enough to produce political consequences for failure. In this environment, the optimal political strategy for a career politician is exactly what Quimby deploys: personal enrichment, symbolic gestures, avoidance of anything that would produce a direct confrontation with Burns's interests, and strategic incompetence in any domain where competence would be politically costly. Quimby is not the cause of Springfield's institutional failures. He is the political product of them. He is what a town produces when its political system has been shaped by the same contamination and dependency and collective denial that shapes everything else. He is Springfield's government reflecting Springfield's conditions back to Springfield. Number. Extended passage. The school that cannot teach. Springfield Elementary School is one of the most thoroughly documented institutions in the show's universe, and what has been documented about it, across 36 years of episodes, is one of the most comprehensive portraits of institutional failure in American popular culture. The school has no money. This is the baseline condition around which every episode set at Springfield Elementary must be constructed. The school's budget is consistently, catastrophically, apparently permanently insufficient to provide the educational services that a functional school requires. Equipment breaks and is not repaired. Textbooks are decades out of date, in some episodes so old that they contain historical errors that have long since been corrected. Art and music programs exist in a state of perpetual precarity, always one administrative decision away from elimination. The cafeteria serves food that the show depicts as genuinely dangerous. The physical plant is maintained at a standard that would prompt immediate action from any regulatory body actually paying attention. Principal Skinner, the man we now know as Armin Tamzarian, manages this institution with a specific kind of competence. The competence of someone who has thoroughly internalized the constraints of an impossible situation and has organized his professional life around making those constraints marginally more bearable. He is not an ineffective administrator. He is an effective administrator of an institution that is structurally prevented from being effective. He knows the limitations. He works within them. He achieves small victories within an overall frame of comprehensive failure. The teachers are similarly constrained. Mrs. Krabappel, the show's most fully realized teacher character, is a woman who entered the profession with presumably different expectations and has been gradually defeated by the combination of student indifference, administrative constraint, resource deprivation, and community non-support. The show depicts her as tired, specifically and relatably tired, in the way that people who entered a helping profession with genuine commitment and have been systematically prevented from helping become tired. She is not a bad teacher. She is a good teacher in circumstances that have rendered good teaching largely impossible. The students' learning outcomes reflect this environment precisely. Bart is academically failing across the board and has been since the beginning of the show, which is 36 years of consistent academic failure that the institution has responded to with various forms of intervention, and none of them effective. Lisa is academically exceptional, a fact the school recognizes but cannot adequately support because the institution does not have the resources to serve exceptional students any better than it serves struggling ones. The school is organized around a baseline that is itself so far below functional that it cannot serve any student well. The radiation theory's specific prediction about Springfield Elementary is direct. The school that cannot adequately fund its own operations, despite serving a population that includes the workers of one of the most profitable industrial facilities in the town, is a school that has been systematically defunded by Burns's management of the local economy. The plant's employment arrangements are structured to keep wages at levels that suppress the property tax base. The plant's management of its relationship with local government keeps its own tax obligations minimal. The result is a school district operating on a budget that is structurally prevented from being adequate, serving a student population whose cognitive development has been affected by the same contamination that is funding its inadequacy. The children who attend Springfield Elementary are both the victims of the contamination and the students of the institution that the contamination's economic structure has made inadequate. Their learning is compromised before they arrive at school by the neurological effects of the contamination. Their schooling is then further compromised by the resource constraints that the contamination's economic structure imposes on the institution. They are being failed at two levels simultaneously by the same cause. And the school keeps running. Because Springfield has a school, and children have to go somewhere, and the somewhere is this building with its outdated textbooks and its dangerous cafeteria and its exhausted teachers and its administrators who have made peace with the impossible. The institution is maintained because the alternative to a failing school is no school, and no school is worse. So the failing school continues, and the children continue attending it, and the outcomes continue being what the outcomes have been for 36 years. Burns is not mentioned in most episodes set at Springfield Elementary. He does not need to be. The conditions he has created operate independently of his direct involvement. The school does not need Burns to visit to be shaped by Burns's economic decisions. The contamination does not need Burns to be present to affect the student's learning. The system he has built runs itself. The damage compounds across generations, quietly, without the direct intervention of the person who established the conditions that make the damage possible. This is the most sophisticated aspect of the system Burns has constructed. He is not visibly present in most of what the system produces. His fingerprints are not on the specific outcomes. He is simply the person who arranged the conditions from which all of the outcomes follow naturally, as though they were nobody's fault and everybody's problem. As though Springfield Elementary is just the way things are, the way everything in Springfield is just the way things are, and has been for as long as anyone can remember, and will be for as long as anyone can see. Number extended passage. What Marge knows. We have spent considerable time tonight examining Homer and Burns, and Maggie and Mona. We have not spent enough time with Marge. Marge Simpson is the character in the show who is most consistently underestimated, both within the show's universe and by its audience. She is framed as the responsible adult, the patient spouse, the load-bearing emotional center of the family. She is defined functionally by what she provides to others: patience, organization, emotional support, domestic management. Her own inner life, her own desires and frustrations and perceptions of the world around her are depicted more rarely and with less sustained attention than Homer's. This framing has led most discussions of Springfield's mysteries to treat Marge as a supporting character in the theories rather than a central one. Homer's coma is Homer's story. Burns's contamination affects Homer's family. The shooting involves Homer's employment. Marge appears as context for these narratives rather than as a protagonist in her own right. But Marge may understand more about what is happening in Springfield than any other character in the show, including Maggie. Maggie observes. She is the perfect observer, watching everything without anyone accounting for her attention. But Marge participates. She is embedded in every social network in Springfield in a way that no other character is. She is connected to the school through her children, to the plant through her husband, to the church through her faith, to the neighborhood through her domestic life, to the town's professional and social communities, through the various careers and activities she has pursued across the show's episodes. She is at the intersection of everything, and Marge is perceptive. The show establishes this repeatedly and then moves past it because the plot usually needs her to be reassured rather than right. But in episode after episode, Marge's initial assessment of a situation is accurate, and the episode's comedy is generated by her accuracy being ignored until the situation has escalated to a crisis that confirms what she saw from the beginning. She knows Homer. She knows her children. She knows her neighbors. She has an accurate read on most situations she encounters, and she routinely watches the people around her choose to ignore her accuracy in favor of whatever they prefer to believe. What does Marge know about the plant? The show has not asked this question directly. But consider what Marge has access to. Homer comes home from work every day and tells her things, or fails to tell her things, and the failures are as informative as the disclosures. She has visited the plant on multiple occasions. She has seen the facility, the workers, the conditions. She has watched Homer's specific behavioral patterns at work over many years. She understands Burns from the specific angle of someone who was briefly the object of his attention, which gave her a clearer view of how Burns actually operates than most Springfield residents have ever had. Marge is not impaired in the same way Homer is. She does not exhibit the same cognitive limitations, the same susceptibility to distraction, the same difficulty sustaining attention on complex problems. Whether this is because of different biological responses to the same contamination, or because Marge has found ways to compensate through the rigorous structure she imposes on her daily life, or because of some other factor the show does not address, Marge functions at a level of cognitive competence that Homer cannot consistently sustain. She has two children who are, in different ways, extraordinary. She has observed Maggie's unusual capabilities for 36 years. She has watched Maggie scan rooms for observers. She has watched Maggie execute plans that should be beyond a 1-year-old's capacity. What has Marge understood about Maggie? The show does not answer this either, but it has, in several episodes, depicted Marge as having an unusual sensitivity to Maggie specifically, a quality of attention to her youngest child that is different from her attention to the others. Not more affectionate, not more worried, but more careful, more present. As though Marge is attending to Maggie in a way that accounts for more than ordinary infant care requires. What Marge knows about Springfield, about the plant, about Burns, about her own family, is never fully articulated in the show. It is present in the spaces between what she says, in the moments where she starts to ask a question and stops, in the things she lets go without apparent effort that would cost anyone else in Springfield significantly more to let go, in the patience that is so complete it has become undetectable, which is, as Maggie understands better than anyone, the most effective kind of concealment. Marge sees Springfield clearly. She has been seeing it clearly for 36 years, and she has made, in the way that people who understand their context make this choice, a specific and deliberate peace with what she sees, not acceptance of it as good or permanent. A decision that the family she is holding together, the children she is raising inside this impossible system, deserve her full attention. That the energy she would spend on the impossible project of fixing Springfield is better spent on the only project she can actually complete, keeping the family intact and loved inside a world that is not going to become safer for them by the force of her individual will. This is not defeat. It is the specific wisdom of someone who understands the scale of what she is dealing with and has chosen to direct her resources toward what she can actually do. Marge cannot fix the plant. She cannot address the contamination. She cannot challenge Burns with any tools that are actually available to her. But she can make sure that Bart and Lisa and Maggie grow up in a house where they are loved clearly and without ambivalence, where the conflicts are honest rather than suppressed, where the people in it show up for each other when it counts. She can make sure that Homer comes home to somewhere that receives him on every day that he comes home, with whatever grace she has available. She knows everything and she loves them anyway. She has always known everything. That is, when you understand it fully, the most extraordinary thing in Springfield. Number. Extended passage. Abraham Simpson and the weight of silence. We have talked at length about Burns, about Mona, about Homer, but there is a man who sits in the retirement castle who has been present in this story longer than almost anyone, and whose specific choices, made quietly and without announcement, shaped everything that followed them. Abraham Simpson? Grandpa. Homer's father. Grandpa is one of the show's most consistent sources of comedy. His senility is played for laughs, his long, wandering stories that have no endings, his tendency to fall asleep mid-sentence, his confusion about contemporary life, his nostalgia for a past that the show renders with gentle absurdity. He is the eccentric old man of the family, tolerated and occasionally visited, loved in the distracted and guilty way that families love elderly relatives they do not fully know how to engage with. Underneath the comedy, Grandpa's history with Burns is the most consequential relationship the show has established. Burns committed a crime. Grandpa discovered evidence of it. In exchange for silence, Burns guaranteed Homer's lifelong employment at the plant. This is the deal. This is what Grandpa agreed to. Sit with the terms of that agreement. Burns committed a crime. The nature of the crime is not always specified, but the show has established enough of Burns's operational history to make the range of possibilities genuinely alarming. Burns has been running a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations. He has been dumping radioactive waste in public parks. He has owned a biological weapons laboratory. He has maintained financial arrangements that defy easy legal classification across a century of operation. The crime Grandpa discovered evidence of was apparently serious enough that Burns considered Homer's permanent employment a proportionate exchange for the silence. And Grandpa agreed to the deal. He accepted Burns's terms. He took the offer of his son's job security and he kept Burns's secret. And then he lied to his son about the circumstances. He did not tell Homer that he had secured his employment through a deal with Burns. He did not tell Homer that Burns was a man whose crimes he had personally witnessed and chosen to stay quiet about. He maintained the silence that the deal required, for years, for decades, apparently permanently, because as far as the show depicts, the deal held until a later episode revealed it. What did Grandpa's silence cost Homer? Homer grew up without the information that would have allowed him to understand his own situation. He grew up without knowing that his mother was alive and had been driven underground by his employer. He grew up without knowing that his job was guaranteed not because he had value to the organization, but because his father had made a deal. He grew up without knowing that the man who signed his paycheck was the man who had destroyed his family. He grew up carrying the weight of Mona's absence as maternal rejection, rather than as Burns's retaliation. All of these things were knowable. Grandpa knew them. He chose to stay quiet about all of them. And Homer, who lacked the cognitive resources to piece together the picture from available evidence, never had a chance of understanding his own life clearly, because the person who had the most crucial pieces of the picture chose never to share them. Grandpa's silence was not simple cowardice. The show has established Grandpa as a man who has faced genuinely difficult circumstances across his long life, and who has made real sacrifices in real moments. He served in the war. He raised Homer alone after Mona disappeared. He did what was required of him across circumstances that were not easy. But the deal with Burns was a different kind of decision. It was not sacrifice. It was complicity. It was the choice to become part of the system that was destroying his family in exchange for protection from the worst consequences of that system. Grandpa was poor. He had a son who struggled. The offer of stable employment, guaranteed and permanent for that son, must have seemed like something real in a life where real security was scarce. The price of a secret he was already carrying anyway. This is how the system captures people. Not dramatically, not with explicit threats or obvious coercion. By identifying what a person genuinely needs and offering exactly that in exchange for a silence that will cost someone else everything, Grandpa needed Homer to be secure. Burns needed someone to stay quiet. The deal was transactional and both parties understood the terms, and both parties kept them. Homer has never known that his father made this deal. He has never known that the security of his employment, the foundation on which his family's financial life rests, was purchased by his father's silence about crimes he witnessed. He has never had the information he would need to feel differently about either his father or his employer, because both of the people who could give him that information chose not to. Grandpa tells stories. He talks constantly, in the way that old people talk when they have lived long enough that the past is more vivid than the present. He tells Homer stories about the war, about his own father, about places he has been and things he has seen. He talks about almost everything. He has never talked about the deal. He has never told Homer about Mona's exile. He has never used one of his endless rambling stories to slip in the information that would give Homer a clear picture of how his life was shaped before he was old enough to shape it himself. The silence is a choice, renewed every day, across decades of visits to the retirement castle and dinners at Evergreen Terrace and family occasions of every variety. Every time Homer is in the room with him, Grandpa has the choice. He keeps making the same one. Under the coma theory, Grandpa's silence is one of the dream's most painful elements. If Homer is dreaming his family, he is dreaming a father who knows everything Homer does not know and has chosen to maintain the not knowing. His dreaming mind has created a version of his father that holds the whole truth of Homer's life behind the stories and the senility and the comedy. And the dream gives Homer everything except the one thing Grandpa knows, because Homer's unconscious mind does not have access to what Grandpa knows either. It has only Homer's experience, which is the experience of a man who was shaped by secrets kept from him. The dream cannot give him the secrets. It can only dream the people who are keeping them. Number, extended passage, the last night in Springfield. Imagine for a moment that the theories are true, not metaphorically, that within the internal logic of the show's universe, all of it is actually happening. The contamination is real. The coma is real. The shooting was covered up. Burns is being kept alive through weekly radiation treatments. Springfield is operating through a mechanism of sustained collective denial that has been in place for decades. Maggie is watching all of it from behind her pacifier, building something, waiting. What does that mean for the family on a specific evening? On a Tuesday night, say in November. Homer coming home from the plant. Marge cooking something in the kitchen. Bart avoiding homework in his room. Lisa playing her saxophone. Maggie in her high chair. The contamination is in the water Marge is using to cook. It is in the air the whole family is breathing. Homer has spent 8 hours in direct proximity to the reactor, wearing whatever safety equipment his department's budget allows, which is not much. He has absorbed another day's dose of something invisible and cumulative. He is 40-something years old in whatever year it is, and he has been accumulating this invisible thing for his entire adult working life. He is happy to be home. This is the constant. Whatever else the day was, Home is better. Marge is here, the kids are here, the house smells like food. There is a couch, and in a few hours he will be on it, and whatever was difficult about today will have receded into the comfortable blur that home provides. Marge knows something is off about Homer's day. She always knows. He carries his days differently depending on how they went, and she reads the difference with the accuracy of someone who has been paying attention to this specific person for 36 years. She does not ask directly. She asks the question that opens the space for him to say what he needs to say. And Homer says something, some partial version of whatever happened, filtered through his specific relationship with language and self-awareness, and Marge hears the version he meant even through the version he said. Bart comes downstairs at some point, negotiates about homework, loses the negotiation, but not by much, finds something to eat, makes a comment that is technically rude and actually affectionate, gets strangled briefly in a gesture that is also affectionate, and returns upstairs to continue not doing the homework. This is how it goes. This is how it has always gone. There is a rhythm to it, established over years of practice. Lisa plays her saxophone because the saxophone is the language she uses when words would be inadequate. She plays something she has been working on, something that is technically ambitious and emotionally precise, and Homer hears it from the living room and feels something that he does not have words for, but that is recognizable as pride and as something more than pride, something in the vicinity of wonder that this person, his daughter, is doing this thing. Maggie is in her high chair watching all of it, following every conversation, tracking every exchange, filing everything in the archive. She has watched this family have approximately this evening, with variations, for 36 years. She knows its rhythms and its textures and its specific quality of imperfect and genuine love better than anyone in the house knows them, because she has been watching without the blind spots that come from being a participant. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She is the most cognitively capable person in the house, and she will not tell anyone this tonight because there is no night on which it is yet safe to tell them. She takes her pacifier and she watches her family move through their evening, and she waits, with the patience of someone who has been waiting for a very long time and who expects to keep waiting for considerably longer. The television goes on eventually. Homer settles into the couch with the specific kind of physical relief that comes from being in the one place in the world where you are allowed to be exactly who you are. Marge settles in next to him. The kids drift in and out. The evening gets quieter as it gets later. The house settles. Outside, the cooling towers are still leaking. The river is carrying whatever the plant releases downstream to the places where Springfield draws its water. Burns is in his mansion, managing whatever needs managing, adjusting whatever needs adjusting, keeping the system running for another day. The system has been running for decades and will run for decades more because the system is more durable than any of the individual human lives it shapes. Homer falls asleep on the couch. He usually does. This is not a coma. This is just Tuesday. He falls asleep next to Marge, in his house, in his town, with his family around him and the television on and the house making the small sounds that houses make at night. And somewhere in a hospital room, or in a Springfield that exists inside Homer's sleeping mind, or in the space between sleep and waking where the dreams that feel most real always live, a family is on a couch, and everyone is exactly where they need to be, and for this hour at least, everything is okay. That is The Simpsons. That is what it has always been about. Not space or secret societies or radioactive fish or immortal billionaires or cases that were never closed. Those are the scenery. The family on the couch is the story. It has always been the story. The only one Homer ever needed to tell, and the one he has been telling, with whatever tools his mind has available to it, for as long as it has been running. It will keep running. The family will be on the couch next week. The same as always. The same as it has always been. Because some things, once started, do not need a reason to continue. They continue because stopping would require someone to decide to stop. And nobody in Springfield, not the family and not the audience and not Homer's dreaming mind and not the system that contains all of them, has yet decided to stop. The loop continues. Sleep well. Springfield will be there when you wake up. It always is. Number, extended passage, Hans Moleman, and the question of death in Springfield. If you have watched The Simpsons for any length of time, you know Hans Moleman. You may not know his name, but you know him. He is the tiny, nearly blind, perpetually unfortunate man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes and exists primarily to suffer. He gets hit by cars, He gets buried alive. He gets eaten by animals. He falls into holes. He is struck by lightning. He is incinerated. He is crushed by objects ranging in size from a falling piano to a collapsing building. He walks into traffic and does not come back out the other side with any confidence that he will survive the experience. He is, by any reasonable estimate, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. Not in Treehouse of Horror episodes, which are explicitly non-canonical. In regular, standard, this counts for the story episodes. Hans Moleman dies in canonical Springfield, and then he appears in the next canonical episode completely fine, with no explanation, no acknowledgement, no resurrection scene. He simply returns, ready to be killed again, in an endless cycle that the show treats as background noise rather than as the profound metaphysical crisis it represents. The show's standard framing is that this is a running gag. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny. Do not think about it. But within the framework of the theories we have been exploring tonight, Moleman's repeated deaths are genuinely strange in a way that the running gag explanation does not actually resolve. If the radiation theory is correct, Moleman represents an extreme case. His specific biological response to the contamination has produced something unlike what it has done to any other character. Homer heals rapidly from injuries. His body is unusually resilient, unusually capable of surviving physical trauma. But Homer does not die and come back. He endures damage that would kill most people and recovers from it, but the damage is survivable. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases function completely, in canonical episodes, in ways the show does not frame as recoverable injuries, and then he returns. The radiation theory must account for this. One possible account. The contamination has produced, in at least one case, a biological mutation so extreme that it has disrupted the normal relationship between cellular death and organismal death. Moleman's cells can die and reconstitute. The organism survives what the cells do not, because the biological systems that normally coordinate death at the organism level have been altered to function independently of normal cellular mortality. He is, in this reading, the most extreme biological consequence of the contamination that the show depicts. Not merely altered by the radiation, but fundamentally reconstituted by it into something that operates outside the normal parameters of biological mortality. If the coma theory is correct, Moleman's role in the dream is different and more specific. He is a background character, present in the dream as environmental texture rather than as a significant figure. Homer's dreaming mind did not construct Moleman with the same care and detail it used to construct the core family. He is a dream placeholder, a figure generated to populate scenes rather than to serve a narrative function. The dreaming mind generates him imprecisely, inconsistently, in a way that allows his death to occur and then forgets the death when the next scene requires him to be alive again. He dies because the dream needs a visual gag in a particular moment. He returns because the dream needs the same function filled in a subsequent scene and uses the available material. This reading of Moleman has an unsettling implication. If Moleman is a poorly specified background character in Homer's dream, there may be others. Characters whose continuity the dreaming mind manages inconsistently, who appear and disappear and change and die and return without the kind of careful tracking that the core family receives. The main characters remain consistent because Homer's dreaming mind has rich, detailed, emotionally laden reference material for them. The background characters may be less consistent because the reference material for them is thinner, the construction less careful, the continuity less monitored. Moleman may not be the only character in Springfield who dies and returns. He may simply be the most visible one, the one whose deaths are dramatic enough that they register as deaths rather than as inconsistencies. The most telling piece of canonical information about Moleman is his stated age. In one episode, he mentions that he is 31 years old. 31. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s at minimum. His physical appearance suggests decades more life than his stated age can account for. Something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man in the early years of his life and compressed what should have been decades of gradual aging into a far shorter period, producing a body that looks like it has been through 80 years of experience before the fourth decade of life is complete. The radiation theory has a direct answer for this. Radiation exposure accelerates certain biological aging processes with a specificity that can produce exactly the kind of premature aging that Moleman displays. The contamination has not merely altered Moleman's biology, It has accelerated the degradation of certain biological systems to such a degree that his body displays the characteristics of extreme age before he has reached the age at which those characteristics would normally appear. He looks 80 because the contamination has done 80 years of aging work in 30 years. His appearance is not a comedy device chosen arbitrarily. It is the most visible and most extreme example of what the contamination does to a body that has been absorbing it since childhood without any of the management resources that Burns applies to himself. And the indestructibility that coexists with this catastrophic premature aging may be the other side of the same mutation. The contamination that accelerated his aging also altered his relationship with death, made him biologically incapable of completing the normal dying process. He ages catastrophically quickly, and he cannot die from the aging or from the physical trauma that his aging body is subjected to, because the same biological alteration that produced one also produced the other. He is trapped between accelerated deterioration and biological inability to complete deterioration. This is, from a certain angle, the most tragic figure in Springfield. He is 31 years old, and he looks ancient. He dies repeatedly and returns each time. He has no apparent social connections, no family depicted in the show, no community that marks his deaths or celebrates his returns. He simply appears, suffers, occasionally dies, and returns to suffer again, in the background of scenes where Springfield goes about its ordinary life without noticing what is happening to him. Nobody in Springfield notices Molman. This is consistent. He is background, he is texture. He is part of the landscape of the town in the same way the cooling towers are part of the landscape of the town. Present, constant, unremarkable, something you have stopped registering because it has always been there. The town has normalized a man dying and returning to life the same way it has normalized a three-eyed fish and a billionaire who glows in the dark and children who have been the same age for 36 years. Molman's cycle of death and return is part of Springfield's ordinary reality, integrated into the background of daily life, accepted without comment because everything in Springfield that is extraordinary has eventually been normalized into ordinary. That is the town. That is what 36 years of contamination and collective denial and the floating timeline and the coma dream have produced. A place where a man can die on Tuesday and return on Thursday, and nobody asks the question that the sequence of events demands to be asked. Because in Springfield, the questions that demand to be asked are exactly the ones that never get asked. The town has made sure of that. The plant has made sure of that. And the loop continues, and everyone stays in their place, and the background characters die and return, and the main characters never age, and the billionaire keeps his weekly appointment. And Homer comes home every night to the family he will not let go of. Springfield endures. Number. Extended passage. On watching Springfield, let us spend a few minutes, before we close, on what it means to have watched this show for as long as most of its audience has watched it. Television has a specific relationship with time that other media do not share. A novel exists complete at the moment you encounter it. A film is finished before you sit down to watch it. Music is recorded. These are objects, complete, existing independently of the time it takes to experience them. You bring your time to them. They do not unfold in your time. Television is different. Television happens in time, in the viewer's time, over the course of the viewer's life. A show that runs for 5 years is present across 5 years of a viewer's life. A show that runs for 36 years has been present across more of some viewers' lives than almost any other continuous experience they have had outside of their own relationships and families and work. The Simpsons has been on the air since before most of its current audience was born. There are people watching the show now who were children when it started, who are now adults with children of their own, who have been watching Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie across their entire conscious lives. Across high school and college and jobs and relationships and children and losses and moves and all of the things that constitute a life. Springfield has been there for all of it. Unchanged, unremarkable, exactly as it always was, waiting in the television for the next time they turned it on. This is not a small thing. This is a continuous presence that has accumulated across decades of actual lived experience. The show has been part of the texture of life for a generation of people who have watched it since childhood. Not just entertainment, not just something they watch sometimes. A constant, a place that existed in the background of their lives in the way that childhood homes exist in the background of lives, as a fixed point to return to in the imagination when everything else is in motion. When fans mourn the quality decline of the later seasons, they are not just mourning a show that used to be better, they are mourning a version of a place that used to be accessible through the television. The early seasons of The Simpsons created a Springfield that felt specific and warm and precisely itself. Later seasons have created a Springfield that is recognizable but different in the texture of its specificity. And for people who grew up with the earlier version, this difference feels like the loss of something real. Not because they believe Springfield is real, but because their experience of it was real, and changes to the show change something in the inner landscape where their memory of the show lives. This is the power and the sadness of the floating timeline, from the audience's perspective. The characters do not age, but the audience does. The show remains constant while the people watching it change, and every time they return to Springfield, they bring a different version of themselves, shaped by more years and more experience. And they find the same Springfield waiting, exactly as they left it, exactly as it has always been. There is something both comforting and melancholy in this. The comforting part is obvious. A place that does not change is a place you can always return to. The melancholy is subtler and requires more time to recognize. The melancholy is in the asymmetry. Springfield does not know you have changed. Springfield does not know you are older, or that you have been through things, or that the context in which you are watching is different from the context in which you first watched. Springfield is the same. You are not. And the gap between your sameness and its sameness is the measure of everything that has happened to you in the years since you first sat down to watch a yellow family fall onto a couch. The theories we have examined tonight are, in part, the audience's way of processing this asymmetry. By constructing elaborate explanations for why Springfield does not change, fans are engaging with the question of what it means to have a relationship with a fictional place across decades of real life. They are asking what the unchanging quality of Springfield means, and they are finding answers that connect it to something in the human experience of time and memory and loss. The coma theory is the most emotionally direct version of this. Homer is frozen in 1993 because Homer cannot age. And we keep watching because we cannot fully let go of the version of Springfield that existed before we were old enough to understand that things end. We are all, in a way, dreaming Homer's dream, refusing to let the story advance to its conclusion, keeping the family on the couch, in the house, in the town, because as long as they are there, as long as we can find them there whenever we look, the part of us that first found them there is still alive somewhere. This is not a pathology. This is the human relationship with the things we love. We hold on to them. We keep returning to them. We find ways to explain why they persist, because the alternative to explanation is simple loss, and simple loss is harder than explanation. Springfield persists. The family is on the couch. The loop continues. And we are grateful, in the specific and slightly embarrassed way that people are grateful for the things they cannot explain to others, that it does. Close your eyes. Let the breathing go slow. Let the images of Springfield settle into whatever background your mind keeps them in. The cooling towers, the school, the quick E-Mart, the church, the house on Evergreen Terrace with the light on in the front room. Homer found his way home. He always does. The dream does not end here. Go to sleep. Springfield will be there when you wake up. It always is. Number, extended passage, The Simpsons and the American Night. There is something specific about the hour when people watch sleep videos. It is late. The day is done. Whatever the day asked of you, you have given it. And now there is only the dark and the quiet and the need for something that carries you away without demanding anything in return. Stories told slowly. Voices that do not need you to respond. The particular comfort of being accompanied without being asked to participate. The Simpsons works for this. Not obviously, not by design, but by the specific quality of what it is. A show about ordinary life made extraordinary, told with warmth, rooted in the specific texture of domestic American existence. The show is not soothing in the way that nature documentaries are soothing. It is soothing in the way that familiarity is soothing, in the way that a place you know very well is soothing, in the way that coming home is soothing even when home is complicated. Springfield is complicated. The theories we have examined tonight make it considerably more complicated than it appears on the surface. The contamination and the coma and the cover-up and the immortality and the denial, none of these are the elements of a simple comfort. But they exist inside a show that is, at its core, about a family that loves each other, imperfectly and persistently, across 36 years of impossible circumstances. That love is real within the show's fiction. It is the most consistent thing across all 342 violations, and all the floating timelines, and all the collective denials, and all the reset buttons that erase the consequences of each week's adventure. Homer loves Marge with a completeness that his cognitive limitations make somehow more rather than less moving. He cannot always articulate it. He cannot always act on it correctly. He cannot always sustain the attention it deserves. But it is always there, underneath everything else, the gravitational center of everything he does and everything the show is. And Marge loves him back with a clarity and a steadiness that the show does not always give her credit for. She chose him. She keeps choosing him. She knows who he is, with his limitations and his failures and his spectacular occasional disasters, and she keeps choosing him. This is not resignation. It is love in the most fully informed sense, seeing someone clearly, including everything in them that is difficult, and choosing them anyway. The children are loved in the specific ways that the specific children they are require. Bart is loved through the strangling and the frustration and the exasperation, through the way that fathers and sons who are alike in certain fundamental ways love each other, combatively, proudly, with the particular tenderness that neither of them can express directly without embarrassing themselves. Lisa is loved through a gap of understanding, by parents who cannot quite follow where she goes intellectually, but who recognize that where she goes is somewhere important, and who are proud of her in the specific way that parents are proud of children who have become something they could not have anticipated. Maggie is loved by everyone who looks at her, because infants are designed to be loved, and because Maggie, whatever she actually is also a baby with enormous eyes who looks up at the people around her with an expression that invites the feeling that she is yours to protect. Homer loves her with a fierceness that the show depicts most clearly in the episodes where Maggie is in danger. He becomes, in those moments, something close to capable of anything. The cognitive limitations recede. The distractibility recedes. The man who cannot sustain attention on a meltdown warning sustains absolute and total attention on the small person who needs him. This is the show underneath the show. The theories and the mysteries and the decades of unresolved questions are real and interesting and worth examining. But they exist in service of the family. Everything in Springfield points back to the house on Evergreen Terrace and the people inside it. The house is yellow. The grass is always an improbable green. The blue car is in the driveway. The kitchen smells like whatever Marge is making. The television is on in the living room. Maggie is in her high chair. Bart is somewhere he is not supposed to be. Lisa's saxophone can be heard from upstairs, something minor and searching and beautiful. Homer is coming through the front door. Home. Complicated and imperfect and radioactively contaminated, and possibly entirely the product of a dreaming mind. But home. The specific and irreplaceable home that Homer Simpson has been dreaming for 36 years, because it is the only place he has ever wanted to be. That is The Simpsons. That is all of it, reduced to its simplest possible statement. A family, a house, a town, a loop that does not end, and someone watching, always, keeping the story company through the night. You are keeping it company right now, and Springfield is glad of it. The town is better watched than not. The family is better loved than forgotten. The loop is better maintained than broken, at least for tonight. At least for these last few minutes before the breathing slows all the way down, and the stories settle into wherever stories go when the night is finished with them. The cooling towers are still leaking. Burns is still alive. The case is still technically closed. Maggie is still watching. Homer is still dreaming, or not dreaming, is still on the couch, or in the bed, or somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking where people who love their families live in the hours when the family is quiet. Springfield is still there. It is always still there. Let everything go slow. Let the town go quiet behind your eyes. Let the family settle into their house and their routines and their specific and irreducible love for each other. Let the loop run without you watching it for a while. You can come back tomorrow. Springfield will be exactly where you left it. It always is. That is the whole point. That is the only point that matters, in the end. Sleep well.